The Project Gutenberg ebook of Lincolniana, or, The Humors of Uncle Abe. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. Title: Lincolniana, or, The Humors of Uncle Abe. Author: Andrew Adderup. Release date: April 14, 2014. Ebook number 45386. Most recently updated, May 2, 2024. Language: English. Credits: produced by David Widger from Page Images generously provided by the Internet Archive. Start of the Project Gutenberg ebook Lincolniana, or, The Humors of Uncle Abe. Lincolniana, or The Humors of Uncle Abe. By Andrew Adderup. 1864. Original. Contents. Preface. Lincolniana, or, The Humors of Uncle Abe. The Wrong Pig by the Ear. Wilkie, Where Does Old Abe Lincoln Live? Too Literal Obedience. How Uncle Abe Felt. PPP. Rat Hand for a Rat Joke. The State House Struck by Wiggy. Graphic and True. A Judge of the Post Office. I'm an Inderlid. How Uncle Abe Got His Sobriquet. I'll take number 11 too. A Severe Retort. Had all the time there was. Could stand it a day or two. Not the worst of it. Accoutred en militaire. Perils of Illinois lawyers. Couldn't make a presidential chair. Couldn't see it in that light. Too tough for the rebels. Little Mac helped by an illustration. An acre of fight. Uncle Abe believes in the intelligence of oysters. An Egyptian snake story. Why Uncle Abe made a brigadier. Uncle Abe puzzled. Uncle Abe divided on a question. Tried for scaring the girls. Thank God for the sass angers. Was NT murder after all? Joe Reed's mule hunt. Has no influence with the administration. A touching incident. A Lincoln man ducked. A comparison. There's enough for all. Making a president. Uncle Abe boss of the cabinet. Uncle Peter Cartwright's wonder. Uncle Abe is Shakespearean. The running sickness. How to get rid of rats. A palpable application. Uncle Abe on the whiskey question. Edwards versus Lincoln. Metallic ring. A grateful postmaster. A serious joke. Fix the date. Rival of Uncle Abe. Uncle Abe's estimate of the Senate. Thought he must be good for something. Aptly said. Uncle Abe as a pilot. Uncle Abe's Valentine. My Mary Ann. Uncle Abe's honor. Smoke that. A sufficient reason. The Boy and the Bear. Too deep. Uncle Abe's first speech. Cute. Abe's spelling. A soldier's theory of the war. Nigger mathematics. Long and short of it. A handy faculty. Uncle Abe on time. A story that had no reminder. Has it gin out? A major. A dry drop. Uncle Abe as a physiognomist. The concrete versus the abstract. Symptoms of civilization. Uncle Abe goes into partnership. Abe passing counterfeit money. The wrong man poulticed. Uncle Abe as school superintendent. Uncle Abe's nose. Take away the fowls. Uncle Abe well fed. A man of means. Call again. Uncle Abe swapped when a baby. Hit at Antietam. A poor crop. Handy in case of emergencies. Value of a reputation. Didn't like the name. Uncle Abe's goodbye. Uncle Abe's last. Preface. Is Joe Miller complete? I doubt it, maugre the pretenses of title pages. An old joke is sometimes like a piece of painted glass in a kaleidoscope. Every turn gives it a new aspect, and the new view is sometimes taken for the original phase. Perhaps this is true of some herein, although I am unconscious of that being so. If the accusation be made, try Uncle Abe first, for he is used to trials. As for me, I shall plead my privilege of telling you the tale as it was told to me. But if these little jokes be not sworn upon for Miller, they shall stand for Uncle Abe the writer hereof, claiming only a godfathership. And others shall follow as fast as I glean them. To aid this purpose, let everybody who has a good thing send it to the publisher of this, and duly it will appear in the complete edition of Uncle Abe's jokes, always excepting the last, for the act of dying over will remind him of some little story with a heek. Jacet Moral. Andrew Adderup. Springfield, Ill, April 1, 1864. Lincolniana, or, The Humors of Uncle Abe. Original. An involuntary black Republican. Sometime after Mr. Lincoln's well-remembered passage of the rebel Rubicon at Baltimore, some radical Republicans, who thought they saw some signs of the president's backwardness in vindicating the Chicago platform, went in committee to the White House to beg him to carry out his principles, or rather to stretch them in Queen Dido's style. "I don't know about it, gentlemen," replied Uncle Abe, with a pretty strong opposition at home and a rebellion at the South. "We'd best push Republicanism rather slow. Fact is, I'm worse off than old Blind Jack Loudermill was when he got married on a short courtship." Someone asked him a few days after, how he liked his new position. "Dunno," said he, "I went it blind to start with, and ain't had a chance to feel my way to a conclusion yet. So it is with me. Perhaps you can see further than I can. To me the future is dark and lowering, and we have now got to feel every step of our way forward. Making Republicans used to be hard work, and I don't see as I could do much at it now, unless I prose light by giving fat offices to weak-kneed opponents, but that," continued Uncle Abe, with a sly look toward several of his old Illinois friends, "would nt be quite fair to those who believe that to the victors belong the spoils. Your idea about pushing things reminds me of the first black Republican I ever made." And the president threw his left leg over his right and subsided into that air of abandon which denotes his pregnancy of a good story. "You see, gentlemen," he began, "in my boyhood days, I had a slim chance for schooling, and did nt improve what I did have. Occasionally a Yankee would wander into Kentucky, and open a school in the log building that was a church and schoolhouse as well, and keep it till he got starved out or heard of a better location. One fall a bald-headed, sour-visaged old man came along and opened the school, and my people concluded I must go. As usual, the big boys soon began to test the master, who, though he was a patient Jeffersonian Republican, seemed very tyrannical to us. My good nature singled me out soon, as the scapegoat of the school, and I got more than my share of the birch. At least, my back was as good as an almanac, for every day of the week was recorded there. But, though this record of pastime was no pastime to me, I could stand it better than I could the taunts and jibes of the boys out of school. One morning when a half-dozen of us were warming before the broad logwood fire, I noted a big fellow, who had got me flogged the day before, standing on the side opposite, his back to the blaze. Both hands were partially open, one laid in the other. Some would lay it to the devil, but it was only the spirit of revenge which prompted me to pick up alive coal, covered with ashes, and drop it into his hands. For a moment he didn't mind it, but it burned all the deeper. When it did burn he jumped and bellowed like a stuck calf. "Who made that noise?" demanded old Whitey. "The master." "I made it," replied the big fellow, rubbing his hands. "Why?" more angrily demanded old Whitey. "Someone put a coal of fire in my hand and burnt me," sniffled the booby. The big fellow, however, didn't know who did it. Some of the boys, who had a lurking pity for me, said it snapped into his hand, but the master couldn't see it, and at last it leaked out that Abe Lincoln done it. "So you see, gentlemen," said Uncle Abe, moralizing, "I got the blame of a long score of supposititious shortcomings by one act of my own, pretty much as I had to bear the sins of my whole party in the late canvass, because of a few sins of my own." "Abraham, come up here," thundered the master. "By the way, gentlemen, my people always called me Abe. My wife still calls me plain Abe, but that old fellow called me Abraham so often and so severely that I early dropped all claim to a definite appellative, and chose to be indefinitely a Lincoln, asterisk. But to go on, I got a deserved threshing that time, and a reputation withal for wickedness that saved all the little rogues in school. At last, however, I determined to be even with old Whitey, somehow. It wasn't long till I worked out an idea. Just over the master's desk was a rude shelf, upon which he kept some books and a big-bellied bottle of ink, which some admirer of his Jeffersonian Republican principles had presented him. I had observed that in stepping upon his desk platform, he never touched or moved his chair, beyond leaning back in it, which he always did, after taking his seat. So next day I robbed our old long-tailed white horse of a few hairs and braided them in a three-stranded cord. While the master was gone out to his dinner, I put the thin glass ink bottle upon the edge of the shelf propped a cant, and tied one end of the cord to the bottle, and the other end to the back of his chair. The boys sympathized with me, and were in an ecstasy of delight. Anon the master came. Without looking to the right or left, he marched sternly to the chair, and hence saw not the repressed titter of expectation that was ready to burst over the whole room. I stood just outside of the door. Expecting the result, he sat down and then leaned back. Down came the bottle, deluging the bald head in a shower of Stygian blackness. Yes, gentlemen, I fancy that was the first black Republican ever made in Kentucky, but the conversion was too sudden. "How was that?" queried Cassius M. Clay. "Why," replied Uncle Abe, "he afterwards married a widow and 12 Negroes." Asterisk. When Mr. Lincoln was nominated, very many papers ran up the name of Abraham Lincoln, the wrong pig by the ear. I never knew a flash phrase worse used up than was one by Uncle Abe. Attending one of the neighboring circuit courts above Springfield, he was employed to aid a young county attorney to prosecute some reputed hog thieves. The crime of hog stealing had become so common that the people were considerably excited, and an example was determined on. The first person tried was acquitted on a pretty clear alibi or pretty hard swearing. As the fellow thus acquitted was lounging round the courthouse, Uncle Abe was passing, and he hailed him. "Well, Mr. Lincoln, I reckon you got the wrong sow by the ear when you undertook to pen me up." "So it seems," replied Uncle Abe, blandly, "but really you must excuse me. Pigs are so very much alike. In fact, people up here don't all seem to know their own. Wilkie, where does old Abe Lincoln live?" In Clay times, as the old farmers of Sangamon still recall the period of Henry Clay's powerful canvass for the presidency, Uncle Abe had a wide Circuit practice. In traveling to the various courts, he generally drove a horse and vehicle that some people will still remember. The horse had belonged to an undertaker, and the funeral business, together with years, had made him a grave and staid animal. His physique presented those angularities that characterized his master, but unlike his owner, he was never known to perpetrate a joke or indulge in a horse laugh. The vehicle was neither buggy, nor Jersey wagon, but had become, by virtue of alterations and repairs, what Uncle Abe afterwards described the Union under the plan of free and slave states, neither one thing or the other. There was in fact an eternal fitness in horse and man that was not exactly a standing joke, but a peripatetic one. I would give all my expectation of a brigadiership for a portrait of Uncle Abe seated in this strange turnout, as he might have been seen wending his meditative way across the prairies. About this time Uncle Abe was nominated for Congress in the Sangamon. Yet he did not forego his business, but prosecuted his legal course, as well as all evildoers who chanced to fall into his hands. He had just started on a circuit trip, to be gone a month. Often, since Mr. Lincoln's nomination for Congress, had Mrs. Lincoln begged him to add a second story to their humble dwelling, but he pleaded poverty. But a relation of Mrs. Lincoln's having died in Kentucky, leaving her a small legacy, she determined her husband should have a house worthy a candidate for Congress. Doubtless she felt an inward satisfaction at the thought of furnishing a good surprise for her husband on his return. So she at once bought material, set mechanics at work, and in 3 weeks metamorphosed the dwelling into what political pilgrims to Springfield in 1860 will remember as a neat, 2-story, clay-colored residence. Uncle Abe arrived home just after dark, and drove up to what he thought to be 8th Street, but not seeing his house, and thinking he had made a mistake, he drove round onto the next street. Recognizing the houses there, he again drove around to 8th, and, passing his own house, recognized that occupied by W.N., a clever tailor, who was standing at his own gate. "Why, is that you, Wilkie?" said Uncle Abe patronizingly. W.N. assured him of his own identity. "Wilkie, where does old Abe Lincoln live now?" "Well," said W.N., "the locos say he's so sure of his election that he's gone to Washington to select his seat, but Mrs. Lincoln lives now in that beautiful new 2-story house you have just passed." Uncle Abe indulged in a quaint laugh, and then turned his ancient horse around, alighted, and asked if Mrs. Lincoln lived in the house before which he stood. Mrs. Lincoln received him as a fond woman should receive her lord, and the return was the cause of much pleasant badinage in social circles. To literal obedience. General McClellan was complaining to Uncle Abe of one of his division commanders, who had literally obeyed an order publicly given for the purpose of hoodwinking the rebels through the aid of the numerous undetected spies known to lurk in the camp as well as the capital. "That reminds me of a little story, a little thing that happened to me when I was out in the Black Hawk War," said Uncle Abe. "You see, after we brought the Foxes to terms, they were as sweet as wild honey. The women especially tried to make a good thing out of the defeat of their braves, by selling us moccasins, deerskin breeches, and see. One squaw in particular, made beautiful breeches, and I concluded to have a pair made. How she was to fit my spindles, puzzled me at first, as the Indians are no tailors in any measurable degree. At last I bethought me of an old pair which I had in my saddle bag, and these I gave to her that she might rip them open and use the parts for patterns. When she brought the new ones home, I was not a little angry to find that she had exactly imitated the old patch on the nether parts of the new breeches. Little Mac smiled in his peculiar grave way, and remarked that when he gave an order for a similar purpose, he would tell this story by way of a hint. How Uncle Abe felt. Soon after Uncle Abe's defeat by Judge Douglas in 1848, whereby Douglas unwittingly made a president, someone asked Uncle Abe how he felt over the result. "Well," said he, "I feel a good deal like a big boy I knew in Kentucky." After he'd got a terrible pounding by the schoolmaster, someone asked him how he felt. "Oh," said he, "it hurt so awful bad, I couldn't laugh, and I was too big to cry over it. That's just my case." It is presumed the questioner got an idea how a defeated politician feels. PPP. Soon after the advent of Uncle Abe at the White House, the pressure of aspirants for official positions was perfectly crushing. In fact, Uncle Abe sometimes got so flustered by their bedevilment, that he not only failed to recollect an illustrating anecdote, but soon lost his temper. One of the Illinois applicants, a fellow named Jeff Dr., was particularly a bore, seeming to think it part of the Chicago platform to give every village politician an office. "Seems to me, Jeff," said Uncle Abe, "you got the Chicago platform reduced to enormous brevity. In fact, just 3 Ps would seem to express your idea of it." "How's that, Mr. Lincoln?" inquired Jeff. "Why, it looks to me as if it was patriotism, place and plunder, and a mighty important plea is the last one, I reckon." Jeff was silent for a while, but bored on until he struck oil in the shape of a clerkship. Rat hand for a rat joke. Just after the retreat of the rebels from Bull Run, when it leaked out that our troops had been held at bay by wooden or Quaker guns, a Pennsylvanian congressman remarked to Uncle Abe, "Well, Mr. Lincoln, you see that Quaker principles even embodied in wood may be of some service in war." "Yes, but as you see in that shape, they are only substituted principles. Such things may do once, but found out, they will avail worse than nothing." Your remark, however, reminds me of a little story. When I was a youngster of 15 or so, I went to an academy for a few weeks, just to brush up my old field school learning. Such schools are called academies in the East, to distinguish their intermediate position between colleges and common schools, but in Kentucky and the West, generally the high-sounding title merely meant that the principal taught a few branches ahead of the old field schools. Well, the rats were thick about the old building where we daily gathered to reap the fruit of knowledge, and as many of the boys brought their dinners and threw the fragments under their old-fashioned box desks, they soon grew as bold as they were thick. The teacher had a mortal antipathy to rats, and as I didn't take to the teacher, I naturally encouraged the rats. Whenever one showed himself, he was sure to get a whack from the old teachers. Rattan. Sometimes he missed his aim at the rats, but never at us boys. Which was owing, perhaps, to the difference in the size of the game. An industrious rat had made a hole from beneath the floor up under my desk, and thence out through the end, and as I fed him well he was quite tame. Often during school hours he would come up and peer out into the aisles through his hole in the end of the desk, and whenever he was seen by the teacher, he was sure to see the rattan whirling in the air. An idea struck me one day. I got a dead rat I did not like to kill my pet, and stuffing it, made quite a good-looking Quaker rat. Then I fixed some springs so I could work my rat out and in at pleasure, so whenever the teacher was looking up, my rat was always out, but when the whack came down, he was in betimes. At last he seemed to think it wondrous tame, and The ill-suppressed titter of the schoolboys finally made him suspicious. The boys had been let into my secret, and relished it hugely, and I was too prone to give a few exhibitions. At last the teacher watched me sharper than he did the rat, and then caught me in the act. He got hold of the rat and beat me alternately with rat and switch, and you may well guess, I was well rat-handed. If soldiers who use wooden guns ever get worse usage, I pity them. The 300-pounder parrot since used by the government, shows Uncle Abe's poor appreciation of Quaker guns and Quaker principles. The State House struck by Whiggery. Soon after the State House at Springfield was erected, in 1840, Mr. Lincoln stood on the east side of the Capitol Square one day, in conversation with a Democratic friend, who was loath to believe that the Whigs could carry the state for tip and tie. "Nothing is more morally certain," said Uncle Abe. "All the signs of the times point to it, and why even the State House is struck with Whiggery," he said, pointing up under the eaves, where is yet seen a remarkable representation of a coon in the stone. Graphic and true. When Honorable Emerson Etheridge escaped from Tennessee during the summer of 1862, his opinions on Tennessee affairs were eagerly listened to in Washington. Among other questions, Uncle Abe asked, "Do the Methodist clergy in your state take to secession?" "Take? Why, sir, they take to it like a duck to water, or a sailor to a duff kid." A judge of the post office, Judge David Davis of Bloomington, Illinois, who was recently appointed, by Uncle Abe, to a position on the bench of the Supreme Court of the United States, is known to many of his friends as one of the best-hearted men in the world. His is withal full of the piety of good humor. I call it piety, because I think a smiling face is a perpetual thanksgiving to God. His benevolence, however, edges down his wit, and gives it more the characteristic of humor, strictly speaking. This, while it may have helped that belly with fat capon lined, has kept him at peace with himself and the world. On one occasion, while Judge Davis was presiding at the Logan County Circuit Court, a case came up that involved a question of postal law. Uncle Abe was on the case, and politely loaned Judge D a small manual of postal law, that he might see for himself what the letter of the law was. The judge gave his understanding of the law, but had hardly finished when Mr. S.S., a burly farmer from Clear Creek, jumped up and sang out, "I reckon that ain't so, Judge. I been postmaster more'n a dozen years, and I reckon I ought to know what's post office law." Of course Judge Davis had every right to fine the man for contempt, but he had a different way of treating such cases. With a tone in which sarcasm only slightly blended, he said, "Truly, I think you ought, Mr. S.S. It has never been my privilege to be a postmaster, and I would like your opinion in this case. Please step this way." The judge moved over and made room on the bench, which Mr. S.S. occupied, and proceeded to give his opinion on the moot question. The bar sat smiling in expectation. "Keep your seat, Mr. S.S., while I speak a word with my friend Parks." Uncle Abe it was who had been interrupted, so he resumed. "May it please the court, I had some doubt on this point myself, so I borrowed the usual manual of postal law, to be perfectly assured. I regret to contend that the clear letter of the law conflicts with the view just taken by Judge S.S. But here the bar indulged in a quiet smile without a stick in it, and it just popped into Mr. S.'s head, that he was out of place, and he skedaddled in haste. "The largest pussy judge that sat on our bench," remarked Will Wyatt. From that day to this, Mr. S.S. has never lost the title he so suddenly gained. I'm an Inderlid. One day while Uncle Abe was attending to a case at Mount Pulaski, the country seat of Logan County, Illinois, he was beset by old B.S. A worthy farmer, but a notorious malaprop, for an opinion as to his amenability to the road tax. You look here, Mr. Lincoln, these fellows here want to make me work on the road. Well, said Uncle Abe. Well, I tells them that they can't do it, 'cause I'm an Inderlid. You see. Of course Uncle Abe concurred in B.S. opinion, and forgot to charge a fee. On another occasion, he wanted John G. Gillette, the great cattle dealer, to proximate him because he'd got the best pair of cattle scales in Logan County. How Uncle Abe got his sobriquet. Someone ventured to ask Uncle Abe, soon after his arrival at the White House, how he got the sobriquet of Honest Abe. Oh, said he, I suppose my case was pretty much like that of a country merchant I once read of. Someone called him a little rascal. Thank you for the compliment, said he. Why so? Asked the stigmatizer. Because that title distinguishes me from my fellow tradesmen, who are all great rascals. So honest lawyers were so scarce in Illinois that you were thus distinguished from them, persisted the questioner. Well, quoth Uncle Abe, glancing slyly at Douglas, Sweet, and others from Illinois, it's hard to say where the honest ones are. I'll take number 11 too. 35 or 40 years ago, a trip from Sangamon or Macon County, to St. Louis, was an event to be talked of. It took as long to make it, and furnished food for as much rustic inquiry and comment, as does a voyage to Europe now. Uncle Abe had then given up rail splitting, and was studying law. Having a little while before treated himself to a, then, rare thing. A suit of store clothes, and a neighbor being about to leave for St. Louis, he resolved to go along. As the teams toiled on at the rate of 15 or 20 miles a day, they were gradually joined by others, till the train presented some with the sights now to be seen on our great overland routes to the Pacific. On arrival at St. Louis, Abe determined to see high life, and accordingly made tracks for a letter A number 1, first-class hotel. The Old City Hotel was then the only house that could claim that distinction. There the merchants congregated, and there the Indian trader sought relaxation from frontier hardships, while the rough trapper was content with the humble fare of the hunter's home. I forget what association called out this reminiscence of that trip, but there can be no harm in repeating the story. Such mishaps have befallen incipient greatness before. At the dinner table, each waiter was provided with a wine card, and each guest had his wine charged to the number of his room, simply calling out, as for instance, sherry number 9, and C. A jolly Indian trader sat just opposite Abe, who betimes called claret, no 11. Abe saw that most of the guests were similarly providing for themselves, and concluded not to appear penurious, so he said he'd take some wine too. What kind, sah? Asked the waiter. Oh, I'll take the same, pointing to the bottle just called for by the Indian trader. What number, sah? Abe was puzzled. Ho had not been used to wine or hotel life, but it was only a moment before he broke the ice. Oh, I'll just take number 11 too. The trader looked up surprised, while several others nearby smiled a faint comprehension as to the state of affairs. Why, young man, said the trader, that is my number, and mine is a single room. I beg pardon, stammered Abe, conscious that he had betrayed rusticity and ignorance, but not knowing exactly how to extricate himself. The good-hearted trader came to his aid. "Were you ever in the city before?" asked he. "Never before." "Well, then, in memory of your advent, it shall be number 11 too," and he quietly pushed the bottle across the table. So agreeable was he that Abe rallied, and the second bottle followed the fate of the first. On renewing the conversation after dinner, the trader was satisfied that Abe had lots of horse sense, but little of worldly experience, and he friendlily invited him to go out with him as a clerk, but Abe declined. Had he gone, what? Perhaps he might have become a respectable Indian trader, perhaps he never had been elected president, and perhaps we would have had no rebellion. A severe retort. Uncle Abe took a great liking to the late Colonel Ellsworth, and afterwards did him the honor of making a colonel of him. The rebel Jackson did the rest, but enough of that. Many of our readers will recall the slim, spruce figure of Colonel Ellsworth as he paraded the streets of Springfield, dressed in a unique Zouave uniform, a mere boy in appearance. He was full of animal spirits. He and Bob O. Lincoln were cutting up didos in the law office of Lincoln and Horndon, which greatly annoyed Uncle Abe, and he gently reproved them. Bob, a little nettled, replied by quoting the common couplet: "A little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men." "Yes," said Uncle Abe, looking severely at Bob, "that's the difference between a wise man and a fool who relishes it all the time." Bob subsided, and Ellsworth betook himself anew to Blackstone. Had all the time there was. When Uncle Abe used to attend the courts in the regions round about Sangamon, he generally made easy stays, and was wont to look at the country and talk to the people at his leisure. On one occasion he was riding by the premises of old H., who was notorious for his unthriftiness, and who was in the act of driving some stray hogs out of his cornfield. "Good morning, Mr. H.," said Uncle Abe. "Morning, Mr. Lincoln, morning. Why don't you mend that piece of fence thoroughly, Mr. H.?" "And keep the pigs out?" asked Uncle Abe. "Ha-nt got time," said H. "Why," said Uncle Abe, with an air of blended reproof and humor, "you've got all the time there is, Mr. H. Whether H. mended his fence and his thriftless habits, this deponent knoweth not, but has often thought how true was the remark, whether as a joke or an admonition. Every second, minute or hour is ours to use or ours to squander. How won't only wasteful would be the rich man who should stand upon a vessel's deck and cast his million golden coins into the sea, yet day after day we stand upon the shores of eternity, and cast the golden moments into the unreturning past. All the knowledge and wealth of the world is but the result of improved time. So don't say you haven't got time, for you've got all there is, as Uncle Abe says. Could stand it a day or two." About the time this occurred, there stood on one side of Capitol Square, in Springfield, a hotel, now doubtless out of memory of most of the occupants of the outlots and additions which speculators have hitched to the original village. In its day it was a first-class hotel, but it waned before the American and is now among the things that were. There were some who doubted the cleanliness of the cuisine, and thereby hangs a tale. Judge Brown arrived in town and put up at the aforesaid hotel, whereat Uncle Abe, on meeting him, expressed his regret, begging him to become his guest. The judge would fain not trouble his friend. "But you know the reputation of the place, the kitchen," said Uncle Abe. "I've heard of it," said the judge, "but as I want to keep my appetite, I always shun the kitchen, if not the cooks." "But surely, can't you see by the table alone, Judge?" "I know, Mr. Lincoln, but I'm going to stop only a day or two, and I guess I can stand for that time what the landlord's family stand all their lives. Speaking of hotels, reminds me of a little episode of one of Uncle Abe's professional visits to Cairo, in Egypt, a town fenced in with mud banks, and celebrated for its mud holes and mean whiskey. Thereabouts is a hotel. And thereat Uncle Abe stopped because the water forbade further traveling. When his bill was presented to him next morning, he ventured to remark that his accommodation had not been of the most agreeable kind. "We are very much crowded," apologetically replied the landlord. "But I had hard work to get breakfast this morning." "Yes," continued the apologist, "we are greatly in need of help." Well, said Uncle Abe, "you keep a first-rate hotel in one respect." "Ah," said the landlord, brightening up, "in what respect is that?" "Your bills," said Uncle Abe, vanishing towards the central cars. The KYROite landlord perhaps thought he ought to be well compensated for keeping a hotel in such a place. A man of his sort used to keep tavern in Passaic County, Indiana, several years ago. A pedestrian stopped with him overnight, for which the charge was $2.50. "Why, landlord," said he, "this is an outrageous bill." "You mean it's a big un," said the insatiate Boniface. "Yes, I do." "Well, stranger, we keep tavern here. What has that to do with such a bill? Look at that air sign, stranger cost $10, you're and the fust traveler that's been along for 3 weeks, and we can't afford to keep tavern for nothin', we can't." Not the worst of it. Governor Morgan, of New York, was urging the employment of General W. in active service. Seward objected, that he was too old for the emergency of the times. "Yes," said Uncle Abe, "we've got too many old officers in the army, and that is not the worst of it, we've got too many old women there." This was when Uncle Abe's faith was strong in Little Mac. "Some conclusions," said Uncle Abe on one occasion, "are non-sequential. To say that Rome was not built in a day, does not prove that it was built in a night." Accoutred en militaire. In the outset of the famous Black Hawk War in Illinois, a Haas company was raised in the region where Uncle Abe was, then, a rising lawyer. I say rising, although he had then reached a height sufficient to help himself to most blessings, and he, the aforesaid UA, was chosen captain. Uncle Abe rode a slapping stallion, who was either naturally restive, or appreciated his new honor too highly. At any rate, he corvette and pirouette like a very Bucephalus. At last he unhorsed his rider, who landed sprawling on the prairie in one of those green excrescences that abound where bovine herds range. As the discomfited Uncle Abe rose, and surveyed his predicament, old Pierre Menard, who was a near spectator, remarked in his broken French, "Vel, I never sees any man accoutred en militaire like zat before." Most old suckers pronounce accoutred as the Yankees do the word cowcumber. And this rendered Menard's joke more unctuous. Perils of Illinois lawyers. Years ago, when the capital of suckerdom was a village of less magnificence than it now presents, when Lincoln, Hardin, Baker, McDougall, Douglas, Shields and Ferguson were all village lawyers, and scarcely known to fame Judge Thomas Brown was on the Supreme Bench of the state. He was to some extent a character, but not a very successful lawyer. He went to California, since when he has been generally lost sight of, but his old friends may be assured that if he is in the land of the living, Uncle Abe's tax collectors will find him. But that's neither here nor there. His ideas of the perils of practicing law in Illinois, in early times, is what is now before the reader. On one occasion, after he had changed his residence to Peoria, having some Business to transact in Springfield, he arrived in that place and put up. At the old American house, now kept by Henry Bidgley, Esq, he chanced to mention the name of Peoria. Instantly the attention of a countryman was fixed upon him, who, at the first opportunity accosted him. From Peoria, squire? Yes. Much acquainted? Pretty well, sir. Know a lawyer up there named H.G.R.S.? Yes, sir. How's he getting along? Oh, first-rate devilish lucky man. He's getting hold of considerable land, hind he. Yes, a deal devilish lucky man. Yes, large devilish lucky man. Look here, squire, said the countryman, evidently puzzled at R.S. being so devilish lucky. What do you mean about his being so lucky? Mean? Why, I call any man lucky that practices law 20 years in Illinois, and don't get into the penitentiary. Couldn't make a presidential chair. Mr. Lincoln, said an ardent sovereignty man just at the beginning of the last presidential contest, Mr. Douglas is a cabinet maker. He was when I first knew him, said Uncle Abe, but he gave up the business so long ago, that I don't think he can make a presidential chair. Now, Uncle Abe proved himself a prophet, although at a tremendous cost to the country. Couldn't see it in that light. A delegation of temperance men recently sought to influence Uncle Abe to take some stringent steps to suppress intemperance in our armies. Among other reasons urged, they said our armies were often beaten because of intemperance. Is that so? Said Undue Abe. I've heard on all sides that the rebels drink more than our boys do, and I can't see why our boys, who drink less, are more liable to get whipped. But you know the corrupting influence of the army in regard to drinking habits, pursued the committee. I've heard that, too, said Uncle Abe, but I think they will do pretty well if I can keep them out of Washington. The committee didn't carry their measure, by a jug full. Too tough for the rebels. When the Illinois boys gathered at Springfield, under the call of the 10 Regiment Bill, they were quartered on the fairgrounds, just out of the city. All the stalls were filled with troops, before which were signs as St. Nicholas, Richmond House, etc., etc. Charlie W., on going through the fairgrounds, looked into the Richmond House, and said, "Well, boys, how do you get along?" "Oh, first rate," replied the Chicagoians, "we're all stall-fed." "Bully for you," said Charlie, "hope you'll be too tough for the rebels." Little Mac helped by an illustration. "I can't seem to reap any advantage from the rebel movements," said McClellan, in consultation with Uncle Abe. "Oh, you just keep a watchful, careful eye on Lear and perhaps you will yet see how to make use of them, as old Mother Grundy did of her crooked wood. Thereby hangs a tale," remarked Little Mac, with one of his peculiar, quaint smiles. "You're right, General. Your remark reminded me of a good old neighbor of my father's, in Kentucky, who died many years ago. She was sweet-tempered, few such in this world." Uncle Abe stopped as though a mental comparison had damaged some woman of his acquaintance. Yes, her disposition was of that kind that extracts good from things evil. And she was her husband's pride and boast. One day he was praising her to a neighbor. "Look here, old man Grundy," said the neighbor, "these women are just like cats, they are all right as long as you stroke the fur the right way. But reverse the movement, and you'll see the fire fly. Now, I'll tell you what, I bet a 4-gallon keg of my 4-year-old Peach, that I can tell you how to make her as mad as a set hen, if you dare to try." "Done," cried old man Grundy. "Well, you just haul home all the crookedest sticks of wood you can find. And then see." Old man Grundy brought home a small load every day or two, and it was knotty and crooked as a pig's tail, but not a word or look of complaint. For a week this continued, with the same result, when he asked the good wife how she liked the wood. "Oh, 'tis beautiful wood," said she, "it burns finely, and then it fits around my pots and kettles just, as if 'twas made on purpose." Lee did not fit into Mac's hands so well, yet the story was not without its use to him. An acre of fight. During the progress of the senatorial campaign between Douglas and Lincoln, Uncle Abe came home to recreate a few days. Douglas, long used to the political arena, bore the fatigues of the canvass like a veteran. His custom was to bathe just after supper, getting some friend to rub him like a racehorse, when he would sit down and enjoy his whiskey and cigar. Lincoln, lank and abstemious, bore his yoke with evident weariness. But to the story. Uncle Abe went up into the governor's room in the State House, where he was soon joined by many of the leading Republicans of the town. Someone remarked on his look of weariness. "It is a mighty contest," remarked Uncle Jesse Dubois. "But Mr. Lincoln does not show his great appreciation of it upon the stand," remarked a Chicago correspondent, in allusion to Uncle Abe's good-humored replies to Douglas. "But still, when the day's gladiatorial combat is over, it seems to me, as the Kentucky fellow said, that I had been through an acre of fight." "Give us that story, Abe," said Dr. Wallace, Uncle Abe's brother-in-law. "Well, one of my earliest recollections of a Kentucky court was a trial about a fight. It took place in the courthouse grounds, and the judge, thinking it constructible as a contempt of court, sent out the sheriff and had the parties quickly brought before him. Both had bruised noses and beavers, and showed the unmistakable evidence of having been in a scrimmage. The witnesses were numerous, and the evidence was so conflicting, that the judge declared he could legally reach no other conclusion than that there had been no fight at all. But the sheriff ventured to suggest, 'Here's Jim Blowers, he had hold on one of them fellers, when I arrested them.' 'Mr. Clerk,' said the judge, 'you will at once swear Mr. Blowers.' 'Now, Mr. Blowers,' said the clerk, 'you will please tell the court what you know about this affair.' 'Well, ax on.' 'Well, was there a fight between these parties?' 'Just a bit of scrimmage.' 'It was a real fight, was it?' 'Well, some people would call it that.' 'How much of a fight was it?' 'Oh, considerable. They pulled and hauled about kinder like two cows when they lock horns.' 'But, tell the court more precisely.' 'Well, I should say it was a right smart fight.' 'But how much of a fight?' 'Well, then, just about an acre, I reckon.' It is needless to say that the crowd enjoyed the joke hugely. It is easier to pay a small debt than a larger one. Uncle Abe believes in the intelligence of oysters. In the year 1860 or thereabouts, when a great patent case was being tried in Chicago and Champaign, and oysters were the favorite viands served nightly to counsel and jurors after the adjournment of court, it happened that one Ed D.N., a young patent lawyer from New York, was present on one of those occasions. Now, Ned is terribly afflicted with a determination of words to the mouth, and managed to monopolize the whole conversation. Ned had a speech to make upon everything, and kept buzzing around like a mosquito, dipping his bill into everything animate or inanimate, no matter which. At last he began to officiate at serving out the oysters, and with ladle in hand, said in his usual stilted style, "I wonder whether this bivalve, this seemingly obtuse oyster, is endowed with any degree of intelligence." Uncle Abe looked at the puppy, who, by the way, had prevented him cracking a single one of his favorite jokes for the entire evening, and quaintly remarked, that he was satisfied that an oyster knew when to shut up, and that was more than some New York lawyers knew. Ned has never propounded the query as to the intellect of oysters. Since an Egyptian snake story. The last county made in Illinois, I don't mean by the legislature, but by nature, and where dirt was so short that it lies under water, part of the year is called Alexander, and used to boast two rival towns, both thoroughly Egyptian in their nomenclative association, Cairo and Thebes. 20 years ago Thebes was the seat of justice, but Cairo was then beginning to entertain magnificent expectations, and her citizens wanted to have the courthouse removed to their town. The contest waxed warm. The Thebans contended that Cairo was only a daub of mud on the tail of the state, while Thebes was destined to hold the same relation to Alexander, that its ancient namesake did to Egypt in the time of Menes. See Herodotus. But to settle the dispute, the legislature must be appealed to, and that involved the choice of a man favorable to the change. This narrowed the fight right down to a hot county canvass between the Theban and Cairoan interests. A Cairo man conceived a scheme that was ahead of anything yet achieved by Uncle Abe's brigadiers in the way of strategy. He wrapped a boulder in a green hide, making a perfectly round mass, to which he attached a mule. Then night after night he drew the stone through sand and mud. By going on a straight line, the mule's tracks were concealed, and the track left resembled that made by a huge serpent. Original. These tracks were mainly in the south end of the county, and caused an excitement that almost absorbed the election interest. Soon it was reported that Mrs. So-and-so had seen a huge snake. The wonder grew apace. Anon it was currently reported that two men had seen the great serpent 5 miles above Cairo. The excitement increased. Several daring hunters followed the track, of which new ones were made every night, but the trail always led into water and was lost. Several persons missed hogs and calves, which were surmised to have gone into the capacious maw of the serpent. Finally word was given out that a great hunt was to come off in the lower part of the county, and the rendezvous was appointed. On the morning, hundreds were there from all parts of the county, and dividing into squads they started to scour the country about. At night they returned from their snakeless hunt, but so anxious were the people to get rid of his snake ship, that they furnished an abundance of edibles and whiskey. All were in hilarious spirits, determined to renew the hunt on the following morning. By daylight the hunters were again on the tramp, and men from the lower part of the county happened to fall into the squad. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a squad of the bands hove in sight of a small village, i.e. one house, a blacksmith shop and a grocery, where, seeing a large crowd assembled, they hurried up in expectation of seeing the dead monster. But the men were voting. "Thunder," cried a Theban, "this is election day, and I'll bet my bottom dollar we're sold." They started for the rendezvous and spread their suspicions, but so few reached their own precincts, that the Cairo man was elected. Then the joke came out, but the Thebans couldn't see the laughing place. Their rage and mortification was so intense. Uncle Abe was a member of the legislature, when an effort was made to change the county seat of Alexander, and though he liked the joke hugely, by which the Thebans had been diddled, he saw the honesty of the thing, and so voted against any change. Why Uncle Abe made a brigadier. When the rebellion had gone so far as to give the most hopeful some clear idea of its extent and malignancy, it chanced that Jamcd, a leading politician of Illinois, made a visit to Washington, and imitated his friend Douglas so far as to call upon Uncle Abe. The shoot that certain prominent Democrats gave indication of taking, by talking of Reconstruction and a Northwestern Republic, gave the new administration some concern. Uncle Abe was very sociable with Logan, Mac, and a few of their ilk. So Uncle Abe not only extended to Mac the hospitalities of the White House, but accompanied him on a visit to the arsenal. While there, their attention was drawn to some muskets which the speculators had furnished to Cameron, and which were thought, generally, very dangerous to those who used them. Mac caught up one, and sighted along the barrel. "Do that again, Mac," said Uncle Abe. Mac complied. Uncle Abe was evidently struck with an idea, and Mac was anxious to know what it was like. "Why, Mac," said Uncle Abe, "I was thinking if we could get all our soldiers to make up that kind of a face, that the rebels couldn't stand it." A moment. Mac didn't relish Uncle Abe's joke, as he was hopefully in pursuit of the third wife, but he put the best face he could upon the matter, and remarked to Uncle Abe, "Perhaps you'd better make me a brigadier then." "And why not?" asked Uncle Abe. "Mac got his commission." Uncle Abe puzzled. Uncle Abe was met one day near Springfield, by a conceited coxcomb, who had built him a house at some distance, and invited him to dinner. Uncle Abe did not much relish the jackanapes' acquaintance. In fact, as Justice Shallow has it, had written him down an ass. However, Abe inquired very minutely, where Snooks lived. "Thistle Grove," replied the verdant Snooks. "But there's no grove now, and not a single thistle." "Eh, what?" cries Uncle Abe, "not a single thistle? Then what on earth do you live on?" Uncle Abe divided on a question. In 1840 or 41, Uncle Abio was a member of the Illinois legislature. The capital had lately been removed from Vandalia to Springfield. The legislature met in the Presbyterian Church. I have forgotten what measure was before the House, but it was one in which there were many members who did not wish to commit themselves. Uncle Abe was in this predicament. He sat near an open window, and when the clerk, calling the ayes and nays, had got down to L's, Uncle Abe thrust his right leg out of the window, and was just drawing its long companion after it, when an anti-dodging member, seeing the game, shut the sash down and held Uncle Abe in a trap. "Lincoln," called out the clerk. "Mr. Speaker," said Colonel Thornton, "Mr. Lincoln is divided on this question, and I move you that the sergeant at arms be sent to bring in that part of him that is out of the window." Uncle Abe was brought in amid a universal titter, to his evident mortification. In 1840, the Union generally went for Harrison, but Illinois, particularly, was Democratic. When the legislature met in the fall of that year, the Whig members tried to break up the new session by absenting themselves from voting to adjourn the old session sine die, so that they could constitutionally meet the next Wednesday morning, the state constitution requiring the legislature to meet the first Monday in December next, ensuing the election of members. After the breaking up of the morning session, the sergeant at arms hunted up the delinquent Whigs. And at 3 o'clock there was a quorum obtained, and the doors locked. The Springfield Register of December 11, 1840, mentions this matter, but thinks Uncle Abe come off without damage, as it was noticed that his legs reached nearly from the window to the ground. A proposition was afterwards humorously proposed, to add another story to the new State House, so that fugacious members would have to go down the water spouts if they ran. Tried for scaring the girls. 30 years ago, when Springfield was blooming into the dignity of its capital position, the American House was its great hotel, and it isn't. its smallest yet, and the resort of those who loved to spend a few hours in the society of the bon vivants who then assembled Lincoln. Douglas, Shields, Ferguson, Herndon, then a young man, but since the law partner of Uncle Abe, and many others not unknown to fame, could almost always be found here during the evening. One evening as they were sitting in free converse in the bar room, one of the chambermaids came in and informed the landlord that a man was under her bed. It seems while stooping down to untie her gaiters, she saw a man under the bed. With rare presence of mind, she excused herself to her fellow servant as having forgotten some duty, and reported her discovery to the landlord. Boniface at once called for volunteers to secure the interloper. So eager were they for fun, that all volunteered. They surprised and captured the man, and brought him down to the bar room, but what to do with him was the next question. Springfield then had no vagabonds who made fees out of misfortunes, i.e. policemen, and it was determined to treat him with the prompt justice peculiar to that era. A court was therefore got together at once, all expectant of fun but the unfortunate culprit. Judge Thomas Brown was decided upon to act as judge, Melbourne, the talented, but eccentric state attorney, was detailed to prosecute, and Lincoln and Douglas to defend the prisoner. Dr. Wallace acted as sheriff. And upon the jury were Dr. Merriman, General Shields, John Calhoun, of Lecompton memory, Uri Manley, and many other well-known personages. Lawborn, though a regularly educated and talented lawyer, took occasion not only to be as funny as he could, but to imitate the prevailing style of oratory too common in Illinois, a style in which the hard-shell Baptist devil mingled with the rough dialect of the backwoodsman. May it please your honor, and you, gentlemen of the jury, the legislature of Illinois, though it has legislated upon every subject it could think of, has omitted to pass any act against a man being born as ugly as he pleases. If such an idea ever occurred to my friend Lincoln here, when in the legislature, I know he would at once dismiss it, not only as too personal, but as repugnant to his honest heart. As for myself, I like ugly men. An ugly man stands up on his own merits. Nature has done nothing for him, and he feels that he must labor to supply the deficit by amiability and good conduct generally. There is not an ugly man in this room but has felt this. A pretty man, on the contrary, trusts his face to supply head, heart, and everything. He is an anomaly in nature, as though the productions had been at fault as to sex, and sought to correct it when too late. They are girls' first loves, and doting husbands' jealous bane. I confess I don't like pretty men half so well as I do pretty women. Afterward murdered and robbed on the Pacific. No, gentlemen, ugliness is nothing. It is manners that is everything. The ugliest man that ever lived, never intentionally frightened a woman, nay, never was so unfortunate as to do so. But this creature, gentlemen of the jury, this mendacious wretch whom you set in judgment upon, this creature, who would doubtless enter for a prize of beauty at a Vanity Fair, how has he failed in his duty to society? Why, gentlemen, by crawling under the bed upon which two fair damsels were about to expose their loveliness to Diana's envious gaze. Did he wish to woo them? Petruchus was rough in his wooing, this man was mean. Woman loves not surprises. Their hearts are fond of open sieges. This is the case of all womankind. Maugre. The slander of Hudibras. He that woos a maid must lie, love, and flatter. It is a mystery that adds to beauty, and the woman who surrenders that to import unity or surprise, has lost half her vantage ground. The story of Gyges and Candle's queen, if not paralleled here, is not without its moral. What else meant this wretch, gentlemen of the jury, but to surprise these charming damsels when only armed with the light shield that the huntress and the cotton plant throws over earthly beauty? Or perhaps he meant more, his own guilty heart can only accuse him. There, gentlemen of the jury, the failure of our legislature to provide a specific punishment for such miscreants, as this lecherous creatures, who steal upon woman amid the mysteries of the bedroom, is no reason why society should fold its arms and leave woman's hidden beauties to be anatomized by guilty eyes. No, gentlemen of the jury. Outraged decency cries for its victim, and here he tremblingly, guiltily stands. Gentlemen of the jury, where are the spirits of the fathers of the Constitution? Are they not hovering over us in the air of the still summer day? Are they not wailing upon the winds that sweep over our prairies? Are they not heard in the sigh of the mountain pine? Are they not abroad in all lands, whispering to earth's downtrodden millions like a voice of hope? Yes, gentlemen of the jury. And where was this creature then? Why, creeping under the bed of two girls, hazarding the chance of overturning, well, it matters not. And much more, in a view that needed to be heard to be appreciated. Lincoln followed, illustrating with anecdotes meet for the place and occasion, of which I recollect only the opening. Gentlemen of the jury, said he, the remarks of my friend Lawborn about ugly men, comes home to my bosom like the sweet odors of a rose to its neighboring great sister, the cabbage. It was a grateful, a just tribute to that neglected class of the community, ugly men. I wish to say something for my client. Although it must in candor be admitted, that he had gone to pot. I don't see why we should throw the kettle after him. He may be the victim of circumstances, he looks very bashful now, and it may be the girls scared him, who knows? At least I claim for him the benefit of a doubt. Why, gentlemen, many of us have, or might have suffered from a concatenation of circumstances as strong as that under which my client labors. Let me relate a little personal anecdote in illustration. When I was making the secret canvass of this country, with my friend Cartwright, the pioneer preacher, we chanced to stop at the house of one of our old Kentucky farmers, whose log cabin parlor, kitchen, and hall were blended in one, and only separated at night by sundry blankets hung up between the beds. As we were candidates for the august legislature of Illinois, our host treated us with the privacy of a blanket room. During the night I was awakened by someone throwing their leg over me with some force. I thought it was neighbor Cartwright, and took hold of it to give it a toss back, but it didn't feel like one of his white oak legs, and while I was feeling it, to ascertain the correctness of my half-awake doubts, a stifled scream thoroughly awakened me, and the leg was withdrawn. Why, gentlemen, would you believe me? It was the leg of our host's daughter. Imagine my position, if you can. What an apparent breach of hospitality. While I was imagining an excuse for my conduct, the old folks struck a light, and the blanket between our bed and that of the buxom damsel was discovered to have been pulled down. More damning proof, thought I. I feigned sleep, but kept one corner of my left eye open for observation. The blanket was soon fixed up, and I was greatly relieved to hear the damsel explain to her mother that she herself had invaded our bed while dreaming, caused by some undigestible vegetables she had eaten for her supper. Our host was serene and affable in the morning, and I had no need to apologize, but, gentlemen, imagine what an escape I had, and have mercy on my client. Uncle Abe made a side-splitting speech all through, and Douglas followed with a constitutional argument. The jury returned a verdict of guilty of scaring the girls, and the judge sentenced the culprit to be whipped in the backyard by the girls. He had scared Dr. Wallace, the acting sheriff, no, a paymaster in the army, went out and bought a cowhide, and the fellow was soon tied up to a post, and the girls made perforce to give him 39 well laid on. The whole affair was a rich evening's divertisement, and cost nothing more than a few lost vest buttons and strained buttonholes. It is needless to say that the fellow became an honest man from that day thenceforth. Thank God for the Sass-Angers. Most of the readers of this have perhaps read A Good Story of Oliver Ditson, the celebrated Boston music publisher. After he had been in business several years, his New Hampshire friends invited him to open his Thanksgiving in his native town. He accepted the invitation and started with some of his friends. On the way, Ditson was the great man of the occasion, and was therefore placed at the head of the table, when it devolved upon him to ask the blessing. Now Oliver practiced more religion than he knew the exact forms for, and he was in a sad dilemma, but he essayed boldly the task. He thanked God for all the creature comforts there were upon the table, for all there ever had been, for all that was expected. But how to quit? He went on, thanking and trying to think at the same time how blessings ended, but to no purpose. Knives rattled, plates moved, and Oliver saw the hungry people were getting impatient, and he came to the end in a real business-like style, with yours respectfully, Oliver Ditson. Almost as good an anecdote is told by Uncle Abe of one of his old friends, a Mr. Sawyer, who merchandised either in Macon or Champaign County. Sawyer was a Yankee, and distinguished for little besides an immoderate liking for sassying earths, as he called that link sweetness which polite people call sausages. When Uncle Abe was stumping the Sangamon district for Congress, it befell that he and Sawyer met at the same country hotel, which was kept by a hard-shell Baptist, whose foible was long prayers and blessings at table. They, Lincoln and Sawyer, happened to be going to the same town by the same coaches. So they were up betimes and ready, but breakfast was delayed. They at last got to the table, and the deacon was just closing his eyes preliminary to the blessing, when the stage horn blew. "Bless me, deacon, there's the stage ready," cried the Sawyer. "Thank God for the Sass-Angers, and let us fall to." I hardly need say the deacon's blessing and perhaps his breakfast were spoiled. But Sawyer had his Sass-Angers. Was NT murder after all? When the present State House of Illinois was being built, and it's a passable edifice, bearing it is too low in the ground, and the summer house up on its top is too low to catch the cool breezes, it chanced that among the workmen engaged upon it was a New Yorker named Johnson. This man had a sovereign contempt for most of the shinplasters then circulating in Illinois, nor was he much amiss in this, for if it was now in existence, it would be exchangeable at par with Jeff Davis shinplasters. But through the instrumentality of Colonel Thornton's negotiations in New York with McAllister of Stebbins, a claim, by the way, that has never been settled but came near settling the state a la Mattoon, a large amount of the bills of the New York Metropolitan Bank were put into circulation about Springfield. For this currency, Johnson conceived so great a partiality that the passion of avarice soon turned it into a mania. He bought all these notes his means permitted, and stored them away about his person with miserly care. One Sunday Johnson was invited to ride out to the cut-off by a man, Smith, for the nonce, and accepted. They didn't stop at the cut-off, but went direct to Sangamon River. Here, they were overheard quarreling. Smith came home without Johnson, who was soon missed, and as he was known to have gone away with Smith, that individual was soon put in that log building still standing, it did in '62, back of Carrigan's Hotel, and which has since served as a hen house etc. Why don't Butler take a picture of it, to show the rising generation what a small house used to hold all the known or taken rogues of old Sangamon. The examination of Smith did not take place until the river bank had been examined. There were signs of a struggle on the bank, and to the water's edge, which gave force to the evidence of the man who heard them in dispute, and all felt convinced that Johnson had been murdered. Although a careful examination and dredging of the river failed to produce the body, Smith was committed for trial. Uncle Abe was engaged as counsel for Johnson, but had little hopes of being of any earthly aid to him. At last the day of trial came, and the prisoner pleaded not guilty. I think it was Melbourne who was the prosecuting attorney. Before the prosecution had opened the case, Uncle Abe rose and said, "May it please the court, I have a motion to make before the prosecution opens, and as it may save the court some unnecessary labor, I hope it will be entertained. I move that the indictment be quashed and the prisoner discharged." The astonishment of the crowded courtroom was immense, shared alike by judge, bar, and spectators. As soon as the judge recovered his equanimity, he asked, "Upon what grounds is so extraordinary a motion made?" "Why, the man Johnson was not murdered at all, and I have the pleasure of introducing him to the presence of the court." Johnson was led forward. Hundreds recognized him immediately. The excitement was so great that the judge adjourned the court. It seems that the parties had quarreled. Johnson had been pushed into the river, but had got out and wandered off in a state of partial aberration of mind and had been working on a farm. His passion for Metropolitan Bank notes and his name suggested an idea that he was the missing man, and he was opportunely produced in time to save a man from being hung. Joe Reed's mule hunt. One of the best-natured fellows in the world, when he is not mad, is Joe Reed, of Logan County, Illinois. Joe is a staunch Republican, a real rip-rarer in the cause, and has given Uncle Abe the lift of a mighty broad pair of shoulders more than once, although at first he had a poor opinion of the rail splitter. Thereby hangs a tale. In 18, the date is forgotten on account of the coldness of the weather that winter, Joe lost a couple of mules. After they had been gone for a long time, he chanced to hear of them in a settlement somewhere within the present bounds of Macon County, Illinois. At the first opportunity, Joe started on a mule hunt, determined to find either the mules or some trace of them. On reaching the neighborhood in question, Joe was satisfied that an old fellow named Bosby Shiel had his mules, and when he went in person, and saw them, the assurance of his eyes made assurance double sure. He at once made claim, but the old fellow had heard that possession was 9 points of the law. He declined to surrender them. Joe immediately appealed to old Squire P., who at once summoned the holder of the mules to his court. The squire informed Joe that he would have to prove property, but Joe said he would only have to swear to his property. In this dilemma, the squire adjourned court till after dinner and remarked to Joe that he had better get a lawyer. "There is young Abe Lincoln, he don't live far from here, and he'll be at my house after dinner." As he was the only lawyer immediately thereabouts, Joe thought he had best employ him, in order to have the law on his side. Soon after dinner a stranger arrived, and the justice, who was landlord of the only hotel in the settlement, whispered to Joe, that was the lawyer. "What?" exclaimed Joe, "that lean, lank gawky?" "Why, I'll bet both of them. Mules I know more law nor he does, for I'm a squire at home myself I am. But his looks is mighty deceivin', I tell you, said Boniface. He's gin out to be one of the pure-test young fellows short o' Sangamon. But Joe was decided, and the squire reconvened his court, he having the meantime laid the case before his young friend, the lawyer, and got his opinion. Acting his own lawyer, Joe felt it due to his course to give a concise statement of the law. As he stood up, he still continued to read from a green-covered book that had engaged his attention most of the day. It was one of Cooper's latest novels. As Joe gave his version of the law, it seemed to Squire P that he was reading the law. "Is that really the law?" said he, as Joe finished his version of the law. "Not the book." "Let me see that book." Joe mechanically handed it to him. After poring over it for some time, he handed it back, with an air of disappointment, remarking, "Drat me, if I see any sich law in that book." "Well, it ain't no wonder ye don't. That's the Red Rover, a novel and not a law book, and you been and lost my place too." Joe found his place, and continued, "What I told you is what the law says, and I know it's so." "Well, as you're a squire, too, I reckon you ought to know. As the mules don't belong to old man Bosbysheel and you swear they are your'n, I hold he's bound to give 'em up." Joe rallied the old squire rather hard about looking over the Red Rover for extra law, but finally give a treat and left the squire and his friend in the best of humors. Said Uncle Abe when he had the smallpox, "I now can give something to everyone who calls. Has no influence with the administration." Judge Baldwin, an old and highly respectable and sedate gentleman, called a few days since on General Halleck, and presuming upon a familiar acquaintance in California formerly, solicited a pass outside of our lines, to see a brother in Virginia, not thinking that he would be met with a refusal, as both his brother and himself were good Union men. "We have been deceived too often," said General Halleck, "and I regret I can't grant it." Judge B then went to Stanton, and was very briefly disposed of with the same result. Finally he obtained an interview with Uncle Abe, and stated his case. "Have you applied to General Halleck?" inquired the president. "And met with a flat refusal," said Judge B. "Then you must see Stanton," continued Uncle Abe. "I have, and with the same result," was the reply. "Well, then," said Uncle Abe, with a smile of good humor, "I can do nothing, for you must know that I have very little influence with this administration." A touching incident. The following incident, which occurred at the White House, will appeal to every heart. It reveals unmistakably the deep kindness of Uncle Abe's character. At a reception recently at the White House, many persons present noticed 3 little girls poorly dressed, the children of some mechanic or laboring man, who had followed the visitors into the house to gratify their curiosity. They were passed from room to room, and were passing through the reception room with some trepidation, when Uncle Abe called to them, "Little girls, are you going to pass me without shaking hands?" Then he bent his tall, awkward form down, and shook each little girl warmly by the hand. Everybody in the apartment was spellbound by the incident, so simple in itself, yet revealing so much of Uncle Abe's character. A Lincoln man ducked. During the canvass between Uncle Abe and Peter Cartwright, the celebrated pioneer preacher, it chanced that Cartwright was returning to his home from the Williamsville and Wiggins Lane settlement. The nearest crossing of the Sangamon was at Carpenter's Mills, where there was the convenience of a ferry instead of a bridge, as is now the case. Upon the hill on the western side of the river, Cartwright saw a man elevated upon a barrel in front of a little grocery, and on nearing him, he discovered that he was giving the Democrats in general, and Uncle Peter Cartwright in particular, a perfect fusillade of small shots of slang and abuse. "I tell you, boys, I'm a Whig, a real Harrison Tippecanoe and Tyler. Too, Whig," said he. "I'm for putting down all these cussed loco-focos, and if we can't vote 'em down, why I go for lickin' 'em down. There's Long Abe Lincoln that's runnin' for the legislature, he's the chap to vote for. He's one of the people split rails and got his eddication by moonlight. He don't go round the country prayin' and preachin' like that mean Methodist cuss, Peter Cartwright, that's runnin' age in him. I'd like to know what we wants of a parson to make laws for us. Just elect him, and fust you know he'll have a bill into the legislature, to fine us for not goin' to meetin' or for drinkin' a glass of whiskey. I'll tell you what, if he ever comes round here, I'll just pass him inter the Sangamon certain sure." "Just here?" Uncle Peter Cartwright inquired for the ferryman. "I'm the ferryman, old hoss," sung out the rustic orator, "and can put yet cross the river in no time." Uncle Peter signified his desire to cross, and the twain started towards the ferry boat. The preacher, stepping into the boat, hitched his horse to the side, while the ferryman shoved out into the stream. "So you are a Lincoln man?" queried Uncle Peter. "I'm that hoss." "And so I presume you would douse a Cartwright man if you had a chance?" "I muft do it, stranger." "Certainly you would douse Mr. Cartwright." "Sure swinkin', old fellow." "Well, sir, I am Peter Cartwright at your service," and before the ferryman recovered from his surprise, Uncle Peter pitched him into the river, took the pole and put himself across the river. The ferryman didn't vote for Uncle Peter, but he altered his opinion of Methodist preachers in general and Uncle Peter in particular. A comparison. One day, as Uncle Abe and a friend were sitting on the House of Representatives steps, the session closed, and the members filed out in a body. Uncle Abe looked after them with a serious smile. "That reminds me," said he, "of a little incident when I was a boy. My flatboat lay up at Alton on the Mississippi for a day, and I strolled about the town. I saw a large stone building, with massive stone walls, not so handsome though as this, and while I was looking at it, the iron gateway opened, and a great body of men came out." "What do you call that?" I asked a bystander. "That," said he, "is the state prison, and those are all thieves going home. Their time is up. There's enough for all." Uncle Abe was terribly bored by the office seekers, even before the presidential housewarming had scarcely began. The Illinois politicians were the most ravenous pap-suckers of all. "Just wait a little," said Uncle Abe, "I can assure you, as L.D.St. did the swine, there's enough for all." "Let us have the story, Uncle Abe," said one of the crowd, who evidently expected something rich. "Why, you see," began Uncle Abe, "I attended court many years ago at Mt. Pulaski, the first county seat of Logan County, and there was the jolliest set of rollicking young lawyers there that you ever saw together. There was Bill F.N., Bill H.N., L.D.St., and a lot more, and they mixed law and Latin, water and whiskey, with equal success. It so fell out that the whiskey seemed to be possessed of the very spirit of Jonah. At any rate, St. went out to the hog pen, and, leaning over, began to throw up Jonah. The hogs evidently thought it feed time, for they rushed forward and began to squabble over the voided matter. "Don't fight, Heek," said St., "there's enough, Heek, For all. The politicians couldn't see anything to laugh at, although the snubbin was plain enough. Making a president. Uncle Abe, in elucidating his estimate of presidential honors, tells a clever story, as he always does, when he sets about it. It seems that Windy Billy, who is a politician of no ordinary pretensions, was a candidate for the consulship of Bayonne, and he urged his appointment with the eloquence of a Clay or a Seward. He boasted vociferously of his activity in promoting the success of the Republican ticket, and averred with his impassioned earnestness that he and he alone had made Uncle Abe president. "Ah," exclaimed Uncle Abe, "and it was you who made me president, was it?" A twinkle in his eye all the time. "Yes," said Billy, rubbing his hands and throwing out his chest, as a baggage master would a small valise. "Yes, I think I may say I am the man." "Who made you president?" "Well, Billy, my boy, if that's the case, it's AHLL of a muss you got me into, that's all." Uncle Abe, boss of the cabinet. A prominent senator was remonstrating with Uncle Abe a few days ago about keeping Mr. Chase in his cabinet, when it was as well known that Mr. C is opposed, tooth and nail, to Uncle Abe's re-election. "Now, see here," said Uncle Abe, "when I was elected I resolved to hire my 4 presidential rivals, pay them their wages and be their boss. These were Seward, Chase, Cameron, and Bates, but I got rid of Cameron after he had played himself out. As to discharging Chase or Seward, don't talk of it. I pay them their wages and am their boss, and wouldn't let either of them out on the loose for the fee simple of the Almaden patent." Uncle Peter Cartwright's wonder. Some of the farmers in and about Sangamon County, Illinois, have been and still are so intent on cattle raising, that the business is a sort of cattle mania. Uncle Peter was one Sunday preaching near a good old deacon of this sort, whose piety was somewhat like that of a card-playing lady mentioned by Addison, Spectator No. 7, who had a set hour for her devotions, and if she happened to be at a game, would get a friend to hold her hand while she said her prayers. Our worthy deacon was rather vain of his gift, praying and saying blessings at table. As a matter of courtesy, he might occasionally ask a visiting preacher to pray or ask a blessing, but he never failed to exhibit his gift to his visitors. He had a sing-song way of getting it off, at the same time beating time with his hands on either side of his plate. On the occasion alluded to, he began, "O Lord, thump, bless the creature comforts, thump, provided for our, thump, sustenance, thump, bless it, thump, to our needs, thump, and necessities, thump, lead us aright, thump, but if we stray, thump, put us back, thump, into the right path, thump, bless the stranger, thump, that comes beneath our roof, thump, and keep his feet, thump, in pleasant paths, thump. What we ask, thump, amiss, thump, withhold, thump, but grant us what our, thump, short-sightedness omits, thump, and thine be the glory, thump, now and forever, thump, a dot." And here the old deacon stopped suddenly, opened his eyes, and looking across the table, asked, "Son John, did Mr. Jones settle yet for that Durham cow?" "Yes, father, it's all right." "Amen," concluded the deacon. "Cattle! Cattle!" exclaimed Uncle Peter in ill-concealed disgust. "Why, you can't say your prayers without having cattle running through your head. I wonder the Lord don't turn such Christians into cattle." Uncle Abe is Shakespearean. When Uncle Abe was making a plea in one of the county circuit courts, not far from Springfield, one of the lawyers, becoming sensible that he was being out-generaled, remarked to Uncle Abe, as he sat down, "I smell a mice." "Why don't you quote Shakespeare correctly?" said Uncle Abe. "Why," said the other, "I was not aware that I was quoting Shakespeare at all." "Certainly you were, and had you done it properly, it would have been more expressive and less vulgar. The correct expression is, I smell a device. The running sickness." In the Black Hawk War, Uncle Abe belonged to a militia company in the service. On a scout, the company encountered the Indians, and in a brisk skirmish drove them some miles, when, night coming on, our forces encamped. Great was the consternation on discovering that Lincoln was missing. His absence, or rather his stories, from the bivouac, was a misfortune. Suddenly, however, he came into camp. "Major Abe, is that you? Thought you were killed. Where've you been?" were the startling speculations. "Yes," said Uncle Abe, "this is me ain't killed either. But where have you been all the time?" "Oh, just over there." "But what were you over there for? Didn't run away, did you?" "No," said he deliberately, "I don't think I run away, but, after all, I reckon if anybody had seen me going, and had been told I was going for a doctor, he would have thought somebody was almighty sick." How to get rid of rats? So thick had the rats become in Logan County, a few years ago, that the means of getting rid of the nuisance was freely discussed. The newly organized Agricultural Society finally concluded to offer 3 premiums for the then largest numbers. The man who took the largest prize exhibited over 1,700 scalps, all caught in the space of 3 weeks. At the time these prizes were pending, Uncle Abe attended court there, and Colonel L.N., a considerable gourmand, by the way, was discussing the best way to get rid of the rats, and finally asked Uncle Abe's opinion. "Why," said Uncle Abe, "rats are a cunning cattle, and soon find out how things are going. I introduce them to your table as a delicacy, and when they find out you are making game of them, they will soon give you a wide berth." The colonel winced under a faint impression, but silently ratified Uncle Abe's conclusions. "Yes," chimed in M., "we might go so far as to use their pelts to ornament our winter clothing." A palpable application. On a late occasion, when the White House was open to the public, a farmer from one of the border counties of Virginia told Uncle Abe that the Union soldiers, in passing his farm, had helped themselves not only to hay, but his horses, and he hoped the president would urge the proper officer to consider his claim immediately. "Why, my dear sir," replied Uncle Abe blandly, "I couldn't think of such a thing. If I considered individual cases, I should find work for 20 presidents." Bowie urged his needs persistently. Uncle Abe declined good-naturedly. "But," said the persevering sufferer, "couldn't you just give me a line to Colonel about it? Just one line." "Ha, ha, ha," responded amiable Uncle Abe, shaking himself fervently, and crossing his legs the other way, "that reminds me of old Jack Chase out in Illinois." At this the crowd huddled forward to listen. "You have seen Jack. I knew him like a brother. Used to be a lumberman on the Illinois, and he was steady and sober, and the best raftsman on the river. It was quite a trick 25 years ago to take the logs over the rapids, but he was skillful with a raft, and always kept her straight in the channel. Finally a steamboat was put on. And Jack, he's dead now, poor fellow, was made captain of her. He used to take the wheel going through the rapids. One day, when the boat was plunging and wallowing along the boiling current, and Jack's utmost vigilance was exercised to keep her in the narrow channel. A boy pulled his coat tail, and hailed him with, "Sir, Mr. Captain. I wish you'd just stop your boat a minute, I've lost my apple overboard." Uncle Abe on the whiskey question. A committee, just previous to the fall of Vicksburg, solicitous for the morale of our armies, took it upon themselves to visit the President and urge the removal of General Grant. "What for?" asked Uncle Abe. "Why," replied the busybodies, "he drinks too much whiskey." "Ah," rejoined Uncle Abe, "can you inform me, gentlemen, where General Grant procures his whiskey?" The committee confessed they could not. "Because," added Uncle Abe, with a merry twinkle in his eye, "if I can find out, I'll send a barrel of it to every general in the field." The delegation retired in reasonable good order. Edwards versus Lincoln. One day soon after Uncle Abe began the canvass with Judge Douglas for the United States Senate, Lincoln, an editor, accosted Navian W. Edwards, Uncle Abe's brother-in-law, as Mr. Lincoln himself. "Well," said Edwards, "I think I must be growing taller and uglier every day, for this is the 6th time I've been taken for Abe within a week." Notwithstanding Edwards was a Democrat and a joker, Uncle Abe made him a commissary in the army. Metallic ring. The new practical postal currency have upon the face, a faint oval ring of bronze, encircling the vignette. Uncle Abe, being asked its use, replied that it was a faint attempt on the part of Mr. Chase, to give the new currency a metallic ring. "A grateful postmaster," said a long-legged huissier, on receiving the appointment of postmaster, in Sangamon County. "I tell you, Uncle Abe, you're a hoss." "Yes," replied Uncle Abe, "a draft horse." A serious joke. Washington, February 18, 1864. To W. M. Fishback. When I fixed a plan for an election in Arkansas, I did it in ignorance that your convention was at the same work. Since I learned the latter fact, I have been constantly trying to yield my plan to theirs. I have sent 2 letters to General Steele, and 3 or 4 dispatches to you and others, saying that General Steele must be master, but that it will probably be best for him to keep the convention on its own plan. Some single mind must be master, else there will be no agreement on anything, and General Steele, commanding the military, and being on the ground, is the best man to be that master. Even now citizens are telegraphing me to postpone the election to a later day than either fixed by the convention or me. This discord must be silenced. A. Lincoln. A young Massachusetts soldier, named Merrill, writes a Washington correspondent, had an ounce ball pass through his head during the Battle of Fredericksburg. It entered near his right eye and was extracted behind his left ear. Another ball would have entered a vital part of his body had it not been arrested by a testament, in which it lodged. When this safeguard was shown to Uncle Abe, he sent to the hospital a handsome pocket Bible, in which was written, "Charles V. Merrill, Co-A 19th Massachusetts, from A. Lincoln. Major General Grant, understanding that your lodgment at Chattanooga and Knoxville is now secure, I wish to tender you, and all under your command, my more than thanks, my profoundest gratitude for the skill, courage, and perseverance with which you and they, over so great difficulties, have effected that important object. God bless you all. A. Lincoln. Fix the date. Uncle Abe was conversing with some friends and remarked, "There's a good time coming." A countryman stepped up to Uncle Abe, and said, "Mister, you could nt fix to date, could use." Rival of Uncle Abe. Old Abe has got off many good things since he left Springfield, but the Following equals anything which has proceeded from that veteran joker. In the Georgia legislature, Mr. Linton Stevens, brother of the rebel vice president, introduced a resolution in the House of Representatives, declaring that peace be officially offered to the enemy after every Confederate victory. Uncle Abe's estimate of the Senate. Uncle Abe says that in the Senate, he owns 9 of the senators and 1/2 of another. Who owns the other half? Asked a gentleman to whom Uncle Abe was speaking. Henry Wilson of Massachusetts, replied the chief magistrate. Wilson is for me, says the president, before breakfast, rather against me while his digestion is going on after it, loves me like pie during the hours which he spends visiting the various departments and asking for places and patronage, and bitterly my enemy from 7 every evening until he goes to bed, drops asleep and commences snoring. Wilson is carrying water on both shoulders, but I guess he'll get a wetting and soil his clothes before he gets through. Thought he must be good for something. An Illinois man who had known the boy mayor, John Hay, from boyhood, was expressing to Uncle Abe, after the massacre at Olustee, some regret that he should have supposed him capable of any military position. About Hay, said Uncle Abe, the fact was, I was pretty much like Jim Hawks, out in Illinois, who sold a dog to a hunting neighbor, as a first-rate coon dog. A few days after, the fellow brought him back, saying he wasn't worth a cuss for coons. Well, said Jim, I tried him for everything else, and he wasn't worth a DN, and so I thought he must be good for coons. Aptly said. To a man who was condoling Uncle Abe on the disaster at Olustee, and suggesting how it might have been prevented, he said, your remarks are well intended, doubtless, but they do little less than aggravate a thing which I can't help thinking might have been helped. It reminds me of a story that I read when I was a boy. An old fellow who had clambered rather high into an apple tree, fell and broke his arm. A sympathizing and philosophic neighbor, seeing his mishap, went to his aid. Ah, said he, if you had followed my plan you would have escaped this. Indeed, what is your plan? Inquired the groaning man. Why, never to let go both hands, till you get one hold somewhere else. The would-be brigadier saw the point, and left. I see you've got to the sticking point at last, as the Democrat remarked to a slippery Republican, whose team had gone into the ground up to the hub. They have gone up every creek and bayou where it was a little damp. Lincoln sold cheap. During the presidential contest of 1860, there was an Italian artist of plaster figures in Springfield, who supplied little Lincolns, as he called his figures, faster than ever Uncle Abe did. He succeeded in putting one of these Republican penates into every Republican house in town, but they finally became a drug in the market. However, he kept his asking price up, but his selling price was as various as his buyers, and hard to deal with. One day, with a load of these upon his head, he entered a jeweler's shop, and accosted the man behind the counter with asterisk. You buys little Lincolns? No, don't want sells cheap, persisted the Italian. Well, how do you sell today? 50-cent piece. I'll give you $1 for the lot, said A. Expecting to pose the Italian. You takes greedily exclaimed the artist, and he left Mr. L.A.N. with a lot of plaster on hand which he had hard work to give away. There's an odor of nationality about those bills, said Secretary Chase, showing a lot of the firstlings of his greenbacks to Uncle Abe. A very good figure of speech, replied Uncle Abe, but you must not get too many under the public nostril, or your figure of speech will be an odor of fact. April 1st, 1862, greenbacks, 100. April 1st, 1864, greenbacks, 55. Uncle Abe as a pilot. The captain of one of the Mississippi River steamers one morning, while his boat was lying at her moorings at New Orleans, waiting for the tardy pilot, who, it appears, was a rather uncertain sort of fellow, saw a tall, gaunt sucker make his appearance before the captain's office, and sing out, "Hello, Captain. You don't want a pilot nor nothin' about this aircraft, do yet?" "How do you know I don't?" responded the captain. "Oh, you don't understand, I axed you s'posen you did." "Then, supposing I do, what of it?" "Well," said Uncle Abe, for it was he, "I reckon I know suthin' about that. Air sort o' business, provided you wanted a feller of jest about my size." The captain gave him a scrutinizing glance, and with an expression of countenance which seemed to say, "I should pity the steamer that you piloted," asked, "Are you acquainted with the river, and do you know where the snags are?" "Well, yes," responded Uncle Abe rather hesitatingly, "I'm pretty well acquainted with the river, but the snags, I don't know exactly so much about them." "Don't know about the snags," exclaimed the captain, contemptuously. "Don't know about the snags. You'd make a pretty pilot." At this Uncle Abe's countenance assumed anything but an angelic expression, and with a darkened brow and a fiercely flashing eye, he drew himself up to his full height, and indignantly roared back in a voice of thunder, "What do I want to know where the snags are for, old sea hoss? I know where they ain't, and there's where I do my sailing." It is sufficient to know that Uncle Abe was promptly engaged, and that the captain takes pleasure in saying that he proved himself one of the best pilots on the river. Wonder if Uncle Abe has forgotten how to sail in clear water? A. Uncle Abe's Valentine. Uncle Abe on the 14th of last February, received a valentine in the shape of a picture of the American eagle, with a financial allusion. The bird of freedom appeared to be engaged in picking up gold coin, while at the end of the bird most remote from his head there was a pile of greenbacks, into which this coin seemed to have been mysteriously transmuted. Uncle Abe, who takes such things philosophically, and always acknowledges a palpable hit with grace and good-natured cheerfulness, went to his Secretary of the Treasury, to exhibit his bird, in order that the latter might enjoy the joke with him. Mr. Chase, however, was not disposed to take the matter in the same spirit Uncle Abe did, but appeared to be much out of humor at this hieroglyphical attack upon his department of the government. In tones in which there was evidently a slight admixture of irritability, he remarked to Uncle Abe that he would like to know who had made this unwarrantable attack upon his financial management of the affairs of the nation, that he feared that some of his subordinates had got up this libel upon him, and that he would give $100 to know who had done it. Uncle Abe, whose question-asking proclivities are well known, said that the offer seemed liberal, but, "Mr. Chase," said he, "before I shall make up my mind on this subject, will you allow me to ask you one question?" "Certainly," replied the secretary. "I merely wanted to understand," said Uncle Abe, "at which end of the bird you propose to pay." "Et tu, brute," responded the head of the Treasury Department. "If I am thus to be made the subject of ridicule, I must renew my application to be relieved from my duties as secretary." "Oh, never mind. Never mind, Mr. Secretary," said Uncle Abe, "we can soon remedy all these difficulties. All we have to do, after we have suppressed this rebellion, is to turn the bird end for end, and let the gold and greenbacks remain just as they are, and all will come out right. The Secretary, restored to good humor, agreed not to resign unless Seward did. That reminds me of a little story. My Mary Ann. Many months ago the post commander at Cairo was a certain West Point colonel of a northwestern regiment, noted for his soldierly qualities and rigid discipline. One day he passed by the barracks and heard a group of soldiers singing the well-known street piece, My Mary Ann. An angry shade crossed his brow, and he forthwith ordered the men to be placed in the guardhouse, where they remained all night. The next morning he visited them, when one ventured to ask the cause of their confinement. Cause enough, said the rigid colonel, you were singing a song in derision of Mrs. Colonel B. The men replied by roars of laughter, and it was some time before the choler of the colonel could be sufficiently subdued to understand that the song was an old one, and sung by half the schoolboys in the land, or the risibles of the men be calmed down to learn that the colonel's wife rejoiced in the name of Mary Ann. Uncle Abe made the colonel a brigadier the moment he heard this story. Uncle Abe's honor. At one time Uncle Abe aspired to a position on the bench, and Mrs. Lincoln, so as to be prepared for the event, practiced the habit of calling her husband his honor, or your honor, as the case might be. Uncle Abe never, however, succeeded to the dignity of the ermine, but, attending circuit at Chicago, and stopping at the hotel, Mrs. L accompanied her husband, as was her custom. Uncle Abe had donned a brand new pair of boots, which were anything but comfortable, and almost as uncertain as a pair of skates to a learner on the keenest of ice. Mrs. Lincoln was enjoying herself in the parlor in a chit-chat with a number of other ladies, and putting on as many airs as her provincial position in Springfield would admit, when a strange, rumbling sound disturbed the pleasant company, who rushed out to learn what was the matter. Lo and behold! There was Uncle Abe in the undignified predicament of tumbling downstairs and bumping the end of his spine upon every step. The new boots, or the swig of 40 rod which he had taken in his bedroom, had proved traitor to him. Mrs. Lincoln was nearly nonplussed, but exclaimed in a consoling voice, "Is your honor hurt?" "No," said Uncle Abe, sitting gracefully on the carpet, with legs spread out amidst the bevy of tittering damsels, and rubbing the seat of his trousers. "No, my honor is not hurt, but my head is." Smoke that. During the session of the legislature of Illinois, in 1836-7, the Sangamon County delegation of 9 members, became known as the Long Nine, from the fact of their remarkable average height. In this delegation were Uncle Abe, General Baker, killed at Bull's Bluff, and W. Edwards, brother-in-law of Uncle Abe, and now Captain Commissary, and some others of note in their day. A law had passed the previous session to remove the capital from Vandalia to Springfield, to be carried out as soon as a new capital could be built. In the meantime, General W. L. D. Ewing, an influential Egyptian member, made periodical efforts to repeal the law and keep the capital at Vandalia. During the session of 1837, we had a regular tilt with the Long Nine, during which, whenever Uncle Abe or General Baker made a point, Ewing would be saluted with the cry "Smoke that," in allusion to Long Nines, a popular kind of cigars used at that day. This probably gave rise to saying, "Put that in your pipe and smoke it." A sufficient reason. Someone recently asked Uncle Abe why he didn't promote merit. "Because merit never helped promote me," said our Uncle Abe. The Boy and the Bear. A committee of the enemies of Mr. Chase called on the President just after the Pomeroy circular was sent forth and advised him to purify his cabinet and let Chase go. Old Abe replied that it is not so easy a thing to let Chase go. I am situated very much as the boy was who held the bear by the hind legs. I will tell you how it was. There was a very vicious bear, which, after being some time chased by a couple of boys, turned upon his pursuers. The boldest of the two ran up and caught the bear by the hind legs, while the other climbed up into a little tree, and complacently witnessed the conflict going on beneath, between the bear and his companion. The tussle was a sharp one, and the boy, after becoming quite exhausted, cried out in alarm, "Bill, for God's sake come down and help me. Let this darned bear go." "Now, gentlemen," said Mr. Lincoln, "you see what a fix I am in. It may be dangerous to hold on to chase, but it will require more assistance than I see at present, to help me let him go too deep." During the Black Hawk War, when the valiant Illinoisians were in hasty retreat from what they thought certain scalping, and the roads exclusively bad, in fact, unfathomable mud in this predicament, the corps in which Uncle Abe was, became somewhat scattered, when the officer commanding, called out to the men to form too deep. "Blast me!" shouted Abe from a slough, in which he was nearly buried, "I am too deep. Already, I am up to the neck." Uncle Abe's first speech. When Uncle Abe first made his appearance in the Illinois House of Representatives, and was desirous of delivering his sentiments on a certain measure, he rose and began, "Mr. Speaker, I conceive," but could go no further. Thrice he repeated unsuccessfully the same attempt, when Douglas, who had more confidence, and had been a year longer in the House, completely dumbfounded Abe by saying, "Mr. Speaker, the honorable gentleman has conceived 3 times, and brought forth nothing." Queued. One night Uncle Abe came wet and cold to a crossroad tavern in Indiana, and found the fire more thoroughly blockaded with Hoosiers than Mother Wells has been able to blockade the Southern Confederacy. Abe ordered the landlord to carry his horse a peck of catfish. "He can't eat catfish," said Boniface. "Try him," said Abe, "there's nothing like trying." The crowd all rushed after the landlord to see Abe's horse eat the peck of catfish. "He won't eat them, as I told you," said the landlord, on returning. "Then," coolly responded Uncle Abe, who had squatted on the best seat, "bring them to me and I'll eat them myself." Abe's spelling. Being asked by a client in Springfield why he spelled so badly in his law papers, Uncle Abe replied, "Because, the suckers are so cussed mean they won't pay for good spelling." A soldier's theory of the war. The soldiers at Helena, in Arkansas, used to amuse the inhabitants of that place, on their first arrival, by telling them yarns, of which the following is a sample. Some time ago Jeff Davis got tired of the war and invited President Lincoln to meet him on neutral ground to discuss terms of peace. They met accordingly, and after a talk, concluded to settle the war by dividing the territory and stopping the fighting. The North took the northern states, and the South the Gulf and seaboard southern states. Lincoln took Texas and Missouri, and Davis Kentucky and Tennessee, so that all were parceled off excepting Arkansas. Lincoln didn't want it. Jeff wouldn't have it. Neither would consent to take it, and on that they split, and the war has been going on ever since. Nigger mathematics. Uncle Abe was lately visited by one of the on to Richmond sort of Gideon gentry, who confidently expressed the hope, so common among the abolition noodles, that Lee's army would be bagged. Uncle Abe grinned to the utmost of his classic mouth, and remarked that he was afraid there would be too much nigger mathematics in it. The visitor smiled at the allusion, as he felt bound in politeness to do, supposing there must be Something in it, though he could not see the point. But I suppose you don't know what nigger mathematics is, continued Uncle Abe. Lay down your hat a minute, and I'll tell you. He, himself, resumed the sitting posture, leaned back in his chair, elevated his heels on the table, and went on with his story. There was a darky in my neighborhood, called Pompey, who, from a certain quickness in figuring up the prices of chickens and vegetables, got the reputation of being a mathematical genius. Johnson, a darky preacher, heard of Pompey, and called to see him. Here yeri a great mathematician, Pompey. Yes sir, ujas try. Well Pompey, I's compound a problem in mathematics. All right, sir. Now, Pompey, s'pose dear tree pigeons sittin' on a rail fence, and you fire a gun at 'em and shoot one, how many's left? 2, course. Replies Pompey after a little wool scratching. Yeah, laughs Mr. Johnson, I knowed you was a fool, Pompey, dere's none left, one's dead, and de other two's flown away. That's what makes me say, continued Uncle Abe, that I am afraid there was too much nigger mathematics in the Pennsylvania campaign. And the result showed that in this instance, at least, the anecdote suited the fact. Lee's army was then 3 pigeons. One of them was taken down at Gettysburg, but the other 2 flew off over the Potomac. Long and short of it, here I am, and here is Mrs. Lincoln, and that's the long and short of it. Speech of Mr. Lincoln from the balcony of the White House at Washington. A handy faculty. Whilst Uncle Abe was passing, in his flatboat, a small town on the Wabash, an old chum accosted him from shore thus. Uncle Abe, are you asleep? Why? Because, I want to borrow some whiskey. Then said Abe, I am asleep. And he rolled over drowsily on the flatboat, and it passed on. Uncle Abe on time. A Methodist dominie was lecturing Abe on his love of gambling. Ah! Abraham, it is a grievous sin in the first place, consider the loss of time. Yes, replied Uncle Abe, I have often begrudged the loss of time in shuffling and dealing. A story that had no reminder. During a conversation which took place between Uncle Abe and a distinguished Western senator, the recent legislative nominations for the next presidency were incidentally referred to. Yes, said Uncle Abe, nursing his leg with evident gratification. Yes, Senator, the current seems to be setting all one way. It does, really, seem to be setting all one way, was the answer of the senator, but, Mr. Lincoln, as you have told me several good stories since I have been here, permit me, if you please, to tell you one. It has always been observed that the Atlantic Ocean, at the Straits of Gibraltar, constantly pours into the Mediterranean with tremendous volume. The Bosphorus empties into it, at its other end, and rivers are seen contributing to its waters all along its coast. It was for many years the constant puzzle of geographers, why the Mediterranean, under all these accessions, never got full, and overran its banks. After a while, however, a curious fellow took the notion of dropping a plummet in the center of the straits, when, lo! He discovered that, though the tremendous body of water on the surface was rushing inward from the ocean, a still more powerful body was passing outward, in a counter-current, some 20 feet below. Oh, said Uncle Abe, seriously, evidently nonplussed, for the first time in his life, that does not remind me of any story I ever heard before. Has it gin out? We do not know what joke Uncle Abe made when he heard the news of the surrender of Plymouth. In regard to the Ford pillow affair, he made a buns by speech, but no joke. His last joke, of which we have any knowledge, occurred when Secretary Chase was starting on his trip to New York. Uncle Abe is like Cromwell without his military genius, and is very fond of playing practical jokes on his associates. It is said that after Cromwell had signed the warrant for the execution of King Charles, he turned round to one of his colleagues and smeared his face with the ink. This he thought capital fun. Uncle Abe's jokes are of about the same quality. When Chase called upon him to say goodbye, the Secretary of the Treasury asked for some information about the probable end of the war, saying it would help him greatly in getting more money in Wall Street. "Do you want more money?" asked Lincoln, and then quickly added, "What? Has the printing machine gin out?" This joke is fully equal to Cromwell's. A major at one of Uncle Abe's levees recently, among the company was a Pennsylvania Avenue tailor whom Abe recognized but could not name. "My dear sir, I remember your face, but I forget your name," said Uncle Abe. The Knight of the Needle whispered confidentially into Uncle Abe's ear, "I made your breeches." Uncle Abe took him most affectionately by the hand, and exclaimed enthusiastically, "Major Breeches, I am happy to meet you at the White House." A dry drop. A refugee from Richmond was telling Uncle Abe of the sad state of affairs reigning there. Among other things, he said liquor was so scarce that the rebel president himself could scarcely get a drop to drink. "He ought not to have a drop to drink in this world or the next," said Uncle Abe. "You are rather severe," replied the refugee. "Well," said Uncle Abe, "if you think a drop would do him good, let it be a drop from the scaffold." Uncle Abe as a physiognomist. While the Western governors were in conversation the other day, one of them asked him if he remembered a certain major of the Illinois regiment. Uncle Abe replied that he could, and he say that he did. The gentleman who addressed him then tried to jog the executive memory a little by mentioning a circumstance or two connected with the major's history. Finally Uncle Abe remembered him very well, which fact he stated in the following graphic language: "Oh yes, I know who you mean. It's that turkey egg-faced fellow that you'd think didn't he know as much as a last year's bird's nest." This was the very individual referred to. It will be seen that Uncle Abe has other fortes than statesmanship, and that of a physiognomist is one of them. The concrete versus the abstract. Dick Yates, the jolly governor of the Suckers, tells that he called on Uncle Abe one morning when he was trying to get the 88,000 acres accepted, and that during their interview Uncle Abe remarked, "Yates, I'll tell you the difference between the concrete and the abstract. When the Senate passed a resolution requesting me not to appoint any more brigadiers, as the vacancies were all full, that's the concrete. But when a senator comes up here with a long petition and a longer face, requesting me to make a brigadier out of some scalawag of a friend of his, as it happens every day, I call that the abstract. Symptoms of civilization. Uncle Abe and his chums were wrecked and swamped once on a trip to New Orleans, and having waded ashore, were in search of shelter and refreshment, without much prospect of success, in a thickly timbered bottom. They had traveled through the forest a long distance, and were in despair of finding any human habitation, when they discovered a Negro hanging on the projecting limb of a tree. "The joy," said Abe, when telling the adventure, which this cheering view excited, cannot be described, for it convinced us that we were in a civilized country. Uncle Abe goes into partnership. In the days when Uncle Abe plied the flatboat business on the Wabash and Sangamon, he made it a practice to troll for catfish and dispose of them to the planters in Mississippi, when passing their plantations. This brought him quite a revenue, which was always expended for 40 rod whiskey, or the fish were traded off direct for that fluid chain lightning. Once while passing the plantation of Mr. Percy, he was bound to have some 40 rod, and went ashore with a fine lot of fish. A large party were assembled at the mansion of the aristocratic Percy, when Julius Caesar informed him that Uncle Abe was below with some very fine fish. "Well," said Percy, "give him his 40 rod as usual, and let him go." "But saw, he won't take it this time," said the darky, "he wants 100 lashes on the bare back, well laid on massa." Uncle Abe insisted, to the surprise of everyone, on this strange price for his fish, and Mr. Percy, to humor him, complied, directing the overseer to cut him gently. When Uncle Abe had received the 50th lash, he cried, "Hold! I have got a partner in this business, to whom I have engaged to give half of whatever I should get for the fish. This overseer would not admit me only on that condition." O' course the overseer had his share well paid, and Abe got his 40 rod as usual, with something added. Abe passing counterfeit money. One day a poor woman ran into Uncle Abe's law office in great fright, exclaiming, "Oh, Mr. Lincoln, my boy has swallowed a penny." "Was it a counterfeit?" coolly asked Mr. Lincoln. "No, certainly not," replied the woman, somewhat indignantly. "Oh. Well, then it will pass, of course," said Uncle Abe. It is hardly necessary to add that the anxious mother went home comforted, and that the boy who swallowed the penny, at the last presidential election voted for honest old Abe, the wrong man poulticed. At the famous watering place of the Blue Lick Springs, Uncle Abe was severely afflicted with a pain in the stomach, which neither gin, cocktails nor other cordials could remove. It was night and he was in bed. His loving wife, unwilling to awake the domestics, descended to the kitchen, and prepared mustard poultice, which she spread on her own handkerchief, and proceeded with it to the distressed Uncle Abe. Before leaving him, she left a light dimly burning in the apartment, but deeply impressed with anxiety, she was not as careful as she might have been in noting the number of her room. Guided by a light which she saw shining in a chamber, and which she supposed was the one she had left, she entered, and gently raising the bed clothes, and laid the warm poultice upon a stomach, but not the stomach of Uncle Abe. "Hello there! What the are you about?" shouted a voice of thunder, and the body and sleeves, whence it issued, sprang out of bed. The lady screamed and ran. Uncle Abe rushed to the rescue from the next room. The waiters joined and a small scene ensued, much to the amusement of all concerned. The poulticed gentleman had indiscreetly left a light in his room, and this lured the lady from her path. Uncle Abe was so amused and excited by the mistake that he quite forgot his pains, but early the next morning, with his wife and trunks, left for Springfield, 111. The poulticed man still retains the handkerchief, a beautiful cambric with the lady's name on it, the initials of Frances Amelia E. Todd. Uncle Abe as school superintendent. When Uncle Abe kept grocery on the Sangamon, he was elected as school superintendent out of his district. It was his duty to examine the applicant teachers on mathematics, which he once did in this wise in his grocery store. "If 2 pigs weigh 20 pounds, how much will a large hog weigh?" "Jump into the scales," said the wielder of the birch, "and I'll soon tell you." Abe did not examine him further in mathematics. Uncle Abe's nose. Uncle Abe, being asked once why he walked so crookedly, said, "Oh, my nose, you see, is crooked, and I have to follow it. Take away the fowls. After Uncle Abe had studied law some time and whilst traveling in the prairie country in Knox County, Illinois, he stopped at the house of Mrs. Galt, an old Scotch lady whose husband was largely engaged in wool growing. Abe at this time was beginning to be proud of his learning, especially of his pronunciation of English. Mrs. Galt, when dinner was over, desired the servant in waiting to take away the fowls, which she, as is sometimes done in Scotland, pronounced fools, I presume, madam. You mean fowls, said Abe rather sententiously. Very well, be it so, said Mrs. Galt, take away the fowls, but let the fool remain. Uncle Abe, well fed old Whitey, Abe's schoolmaster, said to him angrily one day, Abraham, you are better fed than taught. Should think I was, said Abe, as I feed myself and you teach me. Uncle Abe says there is a good deal of the devil in the rebels. They sometimes fight like him, frequently run like him, and always lie like him. A man of means. Uncle Abe was asked by a client whether his neighbor Brown was a man of means. Well, I reckon he ought to be, said Abe, for he is just the meanest man in Springfield. Call again. When Uncle Abe was taken sick recently, and Mrs. Lincoln had sent for the doctor, Uncle Abe, having an aversion to physic, said, he had better call another time, as he was too sick then to joke with him. Uncle Abe swapped when a baby. Abe, when asked whether he could account for his excessive homeliness, said, when I was 2 months old I was the handsomest child in Kentucky, but my nigger nurse swapped me off for another boy just to please a friend who was going down the river, whose child was rather plain looking. Hit at Antietam. Another story of Uncle Abe, too good to be lost, has leaked out. It seems he had accompanied a young lady to one of the hospitals in the capital, where the sympathizing creature, as in duty bound, became interested in a wounded soldier. To all her inquiries as to the location of the wound, however, she could only get one reply, thus, my good fellow, where were you hit? At Antietam. Yes, but where did the bullet strike you? At Antietam. But where did it hit you? At Antietam. Becoming discouraged, she deputized Uncle Abe to prosecute the inquiry, which he did successfully. Upon his rejoining her, she was more curious than ever, when the president, taking both her hands in his, said in his most impressive style, my dear girl, the ball that hit him would not have injured you. A poor crop. An old acquaintance of Uncle Abe's called upon him a short time since with the view to getting hold of a contract. Uncle Abe told him that contracts were not what they were in Cameron's time. In fact, said he, they remind me now of a piece of meadowland on the Sangamon bottoms during a drought. How was that? Said the sucker. Why, said Abe, looking rather quizzical, the grass was so short that they had to lather before they could mow it. Handy in case of emergencies. During the fall of 1863, Uncle Abe was riding on the Virginia side of the Potomac, between Arlington Heights and Alexandria, accompanied by Drive-In of New Jersey. Passing the huge earthwork fortifications, the doctor observed, Mr. President, I have never yet been enabled to discover the utility of constructing and maintaining those forts. What is your opinion about them? Well, doctor, replied Uncle Abe, you are a medical man, and I will ask you a question in the line of your profession. Can you tell me the use of a man's nipples? No, I can't, said the doctor. Well, I can tell you, said Uncle Abe, they would be mighty handy if he happened to have a child. Value of a reputation. A client of Uncle Abe's was tried for stealing, in Springfield, Illinois, when it was satisfactorily proven that he had acknowledged the theft to several persons. Uncle Abe argued in behalf of his client that he was such an abominable liar that no one could believe him and the jury ought not to. The judge charged against the prisoner, but to his astonishment the jury brought in a verdict that the accused was entirely unworthy of belief, and he was therefore acquitted. Didn't like the name. A young U.S. officer being indicted at Chicago, for an assault on an aged gentleman, Uncle Abe began to open the case thus: "This is an indictment against a soldier for assaulting an old man." "Sir," indignantly interrupted the defendant, "I am no soldier, I am an officer." "I beg your pardon," said Abe, grinning blandly. "Then, gentlemen of the jury, this is an indictment against an officer, who is no soldier, for assaulting an old man." Uncle Abe's goodbye. When Uncle Abe joined the Sangamon militia and entered on the Black Hawk War campaign, his colonel was a small snipe of a fellow about 4 feet 3 inches. Physically, of course, Uncle Abe looked down upon his colonel. Abe had rather a slouching look and gait at that time, and, attracted by his awkward appearance, the dapper little colonel thus saluted the future executive and manufacturer of both colonels and brigadiers. "Come, Uncle Abe, hold up your head, higher, fellow." "Yes, sir." "Higher, fellow, higher." Abe stretched his lank neck to its greatest altitudinous tension and said, "What so, sir?" "Yes, fellow, a little higher." "And am I always to remain so?" "Yes, fellow, certainly." "Then," said Uncle Abe, with a woeful countenance, "good-bye, Colonel, for I shall never see you again." Uncle Abe's last. Yesterday a Western correspondent, in search for something definite in relation to the fighting now going on, stepped into the White House and asked the President if he had anything authentic from General Grant. The President stated that he had not, as Grant was like the man that climbed the pole and then pulled the pole up after him. Washington Union, May 16. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook. Lincolniana, or The Humors of Uncle Abe. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works. So the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the General Terms of Use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose, such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start, full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work. To protect the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works, by using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark. Electronic Works. 1.a. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to, and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLOF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg. 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied, or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2. If an individual project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the project Gutenberg trademark. Trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the project Gutenberg trademark license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4. Do not unlink or detach or remove the full project Gutenberg trademark license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with project Gutenberg trademark. 1.e.5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the project Gutenberg trademark license. 1.e.6. You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a project Gutenberg trademark work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official project Gutenberg trademark website www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee, or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full project Gutenberg trademark license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7. Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying, or distributing any project Gutenberg trademark works, unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, provided that you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of project Gutenberg trademark works calculated using the method you already used to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the project Gutenberg trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark works. 1.e.9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the manager of the Project Gutenberg trademark. Contact the foundation as set forth in section 3 below. 1.f. 1.f.1. Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the Project Gutenberg trademark collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects, such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate, or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1.f.2. Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages, except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1.f.3, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs, and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty or breach of contract except those provided in paragraph 1.f.3. You agree that the foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive or incidental damages even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1.f.3. Limited right of replacement or refund, if you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing, without further opportunities to fix the problem. 1.f.4. Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1.f.3, this work is provided to you as is, with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1.f.5. Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of Damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1.f.6 Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the foundation, anyone providing copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the production, promotion, and distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs, and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur: a. Distribution of this or any Project Gutenberg trademark work, b. Alteration, modification, or additions or deletions to any Project Gutenberg trademark work, and c. Any defect you cause. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg trademark. Project Gutenberg trademark is synonymous with the free distribution of electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers, including obsolete, old, middle-aged, and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the assistance they need are critical to reaching Project Gutenberg trademark's goals and ensuring that the Project Gutenberg trademark collection will remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure and permanent future for Project Gutenberg trademark and future generations. To learn more about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and how your efforts and donations can help, see Sections 3 and 4 and the Foundation information page at www.gutenberg.org. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation is a non-profit 501(c)(3) educational corporation organized under the laws of the State of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The Foundation's IN or Federal Tax Identification number is 64-6221541. Contributions to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation are tax-deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's business office is located at 809 North 1500 West, Salt Lake City, Utah 841-16801-596-1887. Email contact links and up-to-date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at www.gutenberg.org/contact. Section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Project Gutenberg trademark depends upon and cannot survive without widespread public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment, including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork, and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, we know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff. Please check the Project Gutenberg web pages for current donation methods and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways, including checks, online payments, and credit card donations. To donate, please visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. Section 5. General information about Project Gutenberg Trademark Electronic Works. Professor Michael S. Hart was the originator of the Project Gutenberg trademark concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 40 years, he produced and distributed Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks with only a loose network of volunteer support. Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as not protected by copyright in the US unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility, www.gutenberg.org. This website includes information about Project Gutenberg trademark, including how to make donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks. Back. Lincolniana, or The Humors of Uncle Abe. 1864. Preface. Andrew Adderup. Lincolniana, or The Humors of Uncle Abe. An involuntary black Republican. The Wrong Pig by the Ear. Wilkie, Where Does Old Abe Lincoln Live? Too Literal Obedience. How Uncle Abe Felt. PPP. Rat Hand for a Rat Joke. The State House Struck by Wiggery. Graphic and True. A Judge of the Post Office. I'm an Inderlid. How Uncle Abe Got His Sobriquet. I'll take number 11 too. A severe retort. Had all the time there was. Could stand it a day or two. Not the worst of it. A Cautrid en militaire. Perils of Illinois lawyers. Couldn't make a presidential chair. Couldn't see it in that light. Too tough for the rebels. Little Mac helped by an illustration. An acre of fight. Uncle Abe believes in the intelligence of oysters. An Egyptian snake story. Why Uncle Abe made a brigadier. Uncle Abe puzzled. Uncle Abe divided on a question. Tried for scaring the girls. Thank God for the sass angers. Was NT murder after all? Joe Reed's mule hunt. Has no influence with the administration. A touching incident. A Lincoln man ducked. A comparison. There's enough for all. Making a president. Uncle Abe boss of the cabinet. Uncle Peter Cartwright's wonder. Uncle Abe is Shakespearean. The running sickness. How to get rid of rats. A palpable application. Uncle Abe on the whiskey question. Edwards versus Lincoln. Metallic ring. A grateful postmaster. A serious joke. Washington, February 18, 1864. A Lincoln. A Lincoln. Fix the date. Rival of Uncle Abe. Uncle Abe's estimate of the Senate. Thought he must be good for something. aptly said. Uncle Abe as a pilot. Uncle Abe's Valentine. My Mary Ann. Uncle Abe's honor. Smoke that. A sufficient reason. The Boy and the Bear. Too deep. Uncle Abe's first speech. Cued. Abe's spelling. A soldier's theory of the war. Nigger mathematics. Long and short of it. A handy faculty. Uncle Abe on time. A story that had no reminder. Has it gin out? A major. A dry drop. Uncle Abe as a physiognomist. The concrete versus the abstract. Symptoms of civilization. Uncle Abe goes into partnership. Abe passing counterfeit money. The wrong man poulticed. Uncle Abe as school superintendent. Uncle Abe's nose. Take away the fowls. Uncle Abe well fed. A man of means. Call again. Uncle Abe swapped when a baby. Hit at antietam. A poor crop. Handy in case of emergencies. Value of a reputation. Didn't like the name. Uncle Abe's goodbye. Uncle Abe's last. The full Project Gutenberg license.